Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is a story about what if Deku became a hero of the underground part 1. If you guys enjoy this what if and want to see part 2, comment down below and let me know before I start. Please do support for more awesome content and leave a like, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel and also share this video with your friends and check out the description in my playlist. The author of the story haveneatsbugs from AO3. So let's start the video. Izuku had been awake for hours fighting throughout the night, and he was feeling it. His ribs ached something fierce, and his jaw was throbbing. When did he twist his ankle? Everything happened so fast, he couldn't remember. But what was currently hurting him in that moment were the quirk suppressant HNDCFFS clamped around his wrists. Not like he had a quirk to suppress, but anyway. The officer put the DMN things on way too tightly. "Hey," he shouted into the empty interrogation room, "Tsukachi-san. I'm getting really bored in here, and I think my parents are worried." The door swung open, and the detective himself walked in and sat down in a chair on the other side of the table, holding a notepad and pen. "Are your parents really that worried?" he asked, only sounding like he cared a little. "No," Izuku answered honestly, because there was no point in lying to this man. "But I am. You see, waiting for hours in a police station with lots of people asking lots of questions has somewhat frayed my nerves. I wasn't even allowed to nap." Tsukachi gave Izuku his very best "I'm not in the mood for this" face. "You're pushing your limits, Kitsune-kun." Izuku whistled lowly. Scary. Truth was, he was terrified. He wasn't supposed to get caught. He was supposed to get home to his mother, who might not actually be home from work yet despite the late, early hour. If she got home and found that not only was he missing, but he left all of his betting money right there on the table. Fear was making his hands shake slightly in the cuffs, and he hoped it wasn't showing in his eyes. Here he was, unable to escape, all his secrets laid bare. And he could do nothing about it. "We'll start easy," Tsukachi said. "What's your name?" What should he say? "People have called me Deku." Tsukachi's frown deepened. "Your real name?" Izuku shrugged. "Won't that show up when you scan my fingerprints?" "It will, but just to confirm, we'd like to hear it from you." Izuku clucked his tongue. "Then I'll pass." "Where's my lawyer?" "Aren't I supposed to have a lawyer?" Tsukachi leaned over the table, trying to look intimidating. It was working. "Listen here, Kitsune-kun. We have your face, your DNA, and your friend. Your fingerprints are all over the murder weapon, not to mention dash." Whoa, Izuku interrupted, eyes wide. "Murder weapon? I never killed anybody." Tsukachi's eyes narrowed. "You're not lying. However, evidence shows that you were involved with the murder of a man who went by Brimstone, and the murder weapon is a weaponized baseball bat. Isn't that your trademark?" Izuku had stopped listening halfway through. "No," he breathed. "Brimstone was dead. Was it his fault?" "Look, kid," Tsukachi said, voice gentler now. "Unless you cooperate with us, this situation doesn't look good for you. With your history, you could end up in adult prison for a long time, and so could your friend." Izuku perked up at that. That's right, he had mentioned his friend. "You caught Noboru." Tsukachi wrote something down on his notebook. "𝐶𝐻𝐻. He just gave them Noboru's name." "Yes, and he's rather worse for wear. So if your goal tonight is to help yourself and him, then I suggest you start talking." Izuku gulped. He had to do this, didn't he? He was in some really deep SHT now. His poor mom. He took a deep breath and began. "My name is Midoriya Izuku, and it started 3 years ago." Izuku felt the bricks of the school wall pressing into his back, scratching his skin under his shirt. Katsuki loomed in front of him, blocking the sun and casting a shadow over Izuku's cowering form. The bully's hand was grasping his left arm painfully, heating up with every second that passed. Katsuki's friends were surrounding them to keep Izuku from running off again. His backpack was floating sullenly in the koi pond to his right. "Deku. Where do you think you're going?" Katsuki said, tightening his already vice-like grip. Izuku knew it was rhetoric, but he still managed to whimper, "I am going home, Kaken. Because, school is out." It was the wrong thing to say. Katsuki's simmering hand exploded with heat, burning through Izuku's sleeve and leaving a hot red mark on his upper arm. Izuku bit back a scream and grabbed Katsuki's wrist, desperately trying to pry him off. Katsuki wasn't budging. "You trying to talk down to me?" "Ha!" he yelled, leaning closer to Izuku and bringing his other hand up to Izuku's face. "No. No. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. Please don't." Izuku cried. He couldn't back away from those eyes, manic and power-hungry and cruel. Katsuki let out a sharp bark of laughter. He grabbed the collar of Izuku's shirt and lifted him close so that they were nose to nose. Izuku could see the tightening of muscles around Katsuki's eyes as he scowled deeply. Around them, the other boys were holding back laughter at Izuku's patheticness. "Listen here, shitty nerd. Never try to run away again. You're just a weak, quirkless little F-er who can't even stand up for himself." Katsuki threw Izuku back against the wall. His head hit the bricks harshly, forcing him to hiss. Katsuki bent down to his height and poked him in the chest. "You will not pull this SHT in junior high," he growled. "Give up on your DMN dream and accept that you're just AF Deku already." Then, finally, he backed up and spun around, apparently satisfied with his dose of torment for the day. Izuku watched as the gang of boys walked away, laughing to each other and complimenting Katsuki on his quirk use and showing that quirkless runt his place. Izuku sank to the ground and put his head on his knees. It was hot outside, stiflingly so. His arm felt like someone had slapped a sunburn. It would blister and peel later, but he could put ointment on it. His shirt sleeve was ruined, though. Maybe he could sneak his mother's sewing supplies from her bathroom and stitch it before she notices. Eventually he stood up and dragged his feet over to his backpack, where koi fish were nipping curiously at the straps. "Not for you," he chided them as he lifted it out of the pond and winced. It was completely soaked, along with all of his papers inside. He'll have to sneak his mom's hairdryer too. The sun beat down on him as he turned and started to jog home, backpack sloshing against his back with every step. The truth was that he was running away from Katsuki and his friends when school got out, trying to get home as soon as possible. Usually Izuku would stay behind, knowing it was better to stand and take the incoming assault than run and get beat worse. But ever since Izuku and his mother received the news from America, he had been afraid of leaving her home alone for too long. If she became too grief-stricken to take care of herself, he needed to be there for her. 4 days ago a phone call came in that changed their lives forever. Izuku remembered how Inko dropped the landline, the clatter as it hit their hardwood floor, the noise that came out of his mother's throat as she sank to her knees with her face in her hands. He would never forget the ice-cold fear that struck him in that moment, simultaneously overthinking and drawing blanks. He had stood over his mother in their hallway, put a hand on her back, and impatiently waited for her sobbing to calm down so she could tell him what happened. When she did, it was as if Izuku's world slipped from beneath his feet. Hisashi was dead. He died when his office building fell around him during a villain attack. In America, villain attacks were more common than in Japan, and largely more destructive. America's hero system was so flawed and unorganized that villains felt safe to go wreak havoc as they pleased, and when heroes answered the call, they tended to just cause more damage. It was too dangerous to send him back there, Inko had cried. "We shouldn't have let him go, Izuku. I don't care about the money, we would have worked something out. We shouldn't have let him go back, it was too dangerous, and now he's gone." So now, in the simmering August heat, Izuku was running home. He hoped his mother was feeling better today, after yesterday's funeral. A lot of people had come to say goodbye to Hisashi, including Katsuki's parents, work associates, and old friends. During their prayers, before the guests left and before the cremation began, everyone was able to speak to Hisashi one last time. "Mom really loved you," Izuku told his father, "and I did too. I know you loved us both. I just wish I knew you better." 𝐴𝐻𝐸 was watching the television when he pushed open the door, his sleeves shoved up to conceal the burn. Her hair was tangled and she hadn't changed out of her pajamas. She stared listlessly at the news, seeing something far away, something that the soul out of her. The atmosphere in the apartment felt empty as 𝐬𝐻𝐸 dropped his backpack in his room. He sat down next to his mom, sinking slightly in the pleather couch, and wrapped his arms around her, burying his face in her shoulder. Like a computer rebooting, 𝐴𝐻𝐸 perked up. Without saying a word she returned his embrace. Their hugs were a lot longer nowadays, neither willing to let go of their lifeline. When they eventually did push away, 𝐴𝐻𝐸 looked down at her son with a strained smile. "How was your day, baby?" she asked. 𝐬𝐻𝐸 hummed and brought the hand of his uninjured arm to the back of his head, feeling a bump where it hit the school wall. "Not bad," he said. 𝐴𝐻𝐸's smile grew a little more genuine and she stood up, turning off the television. "I'll get started on dinner, then. It's funny actually, I wasn't even aware that it was time for you to come home until you sat down next to me. I would have started dinner sooner if I knew," 𝐴𝐻𝐸 said, walking towards the kitchen. She laughed softly to herself, but 𝐬𝐻𝐸 didn't laugh with her. He curled up on the couch and flopped over on his side. The pleather felt cool beneath him, so he closed his eyes, enjoying the feeling of sinking into comfort. Sounds from the kitchen of cabinets opening and closing, a pan being set on the stove, a knife chopping vegetables on a plastic cutting board, all wafted over to the living room as 𝐬𝐻𝐸 fought off the sleepiness that came with a long day at school. He listened to his mother work and wondered if she was going to make 𝐀𝐦 again. She's been making it frequently the past few days, as if 𝐬𝐻𝐸's favorite food would make him feel better. She didn't need to do that. He was going to be okay. She should focus on taking care of herself, too. 𝐬𝐻𝐸, 𝐴𝐻𝐸 called, and 𝐬𝐻𝐸 opened his eyes to find her looking over her shoulder at him. "Your father's testator finally sent us his will. It's on the kitchen table, if you want to have a look." 𝐬𝐻𝐸 sat up and looked over at the table where, lo and behold, a series of papers lay in a neat pile. Curious, he sluggishly removed himself from the couch and sat down at the table. He read the first page, skimming past the legal jargon until he found something he actually understood. Most of it was standard inheritance clarification. Hisashi only had 2 heirs, 𝐴𝐻𝐸 and 𝐬𝐻𝐸, no siblings or parents to demand their cut. The apartment was left in 𝐴𝐻𝐸's name, as were his savings, the apartment in America he lived in, and his car. Hisashi's more personal belongings, such as his clothes and a silver watch, went to 𝐬𝐻𝐸. 𝐴𝐻𝐸 slid into the chair next to 𝐬𝐻𝐸 when he was almost done with the 3rd page. She was smiling sadly, reaching to pet 𝐬𝐻𝐸's head. "The plan was to wait until you came of age, then edit the will so that some of that money would go into your college account," 𝐴𝐻𝐸 said. "As it was, he wasn't sure what you would have done with the money. Neither he nor I went to college. I tried to tell him that you had the brains for it, but he didn't know you like I do, so." 𝐬𝐻𝐸 fought back the rise of indignation that grew in his belly. Obviously Hisashi didn't know his only son, he hardly ever came home. But that wasn't fair to the man. It wasn't like he didn't try. He was busy, and still made it back in time for birthdays and holidays. Except for last month's birthday, 𝐬𝐻𝐸's 12th. There was no visit that day. No explanation. No call. Well, the call did come, about a week later, with a harried Hisashi on the other end of the line begging for forgiveness. 𝐬𝐻𝐸 had been too relieved to be mad at him, accepted the birthday wishes, and ended the call rather awkwardly. A week after that 𝐬𝐻𝐸's birthday present from America came in the mail. 𝐬𝐻𝐸 hadn't opened it. He had too many mixed feelings about his father, missing him, angry at his forgetfulness, bitter at the situation, proud he had a father who worked so strong. After the news of Hisashi's death, his feelings only grew more intense and confused. He just couldn't open the box. But then 3 weeks later Hisashi died. And the box still sat unopened on 𝐬𝐻𝐸's desk. And now his father's will was in front of him, and 𝐬𝐻𝐸 has inherited clothes that would be too big for him, a watch that he could not use until he was older, a briefcase unsuited for his dream job, and a smattering of other things. These were the belongings of a businessman, not a hero. 𝐬𝐻𝐸 bit his tongue and tried not to think about the small amount of faith Hisashi must have had in him. "There's one more thing," 𝐀𝐦 said, flipping to the last page. "Read this." Izuku skimmed past more big words he didn't know until he saw one sentence that stopped him in his tracks. Oh. He hadn't thought of that. "How much is it?" he asked his mother, trying to meet her eyes. The faraway look was back in her eyes as she stared down at her hands. She took a deep breath and turned her head slightly towards her son. "Your father was not a careful man. Not as careful as he should have been, anyway. He was injured a lot, and had no health insurance, and well, it's America, and he really did send most of his paycheck to us, and the car wasn't paid off yet, and he was probably a little backed up on rent, so. It's quite a lot. The amount should decrease significantly after we sell that car, but," and finally she met his eyes, as full of worry as they were. "Your father was about $60,000 in debt, dear. It'll take years to pay it off, and even then, we need to move." Izuku blinked. 60,000, that was 3 million yen. Holy shoot, he breathed. 𝐀𝐦 merely nodded, still staring at her hands that were now clenching her pajama shirt. They sat like that for a while. Izuku brought a hand up to his mouth and rubbed his lip as he thought. Hisashi left the Midoriyas in so much debt there was hardly any way to pay it off. What was his old man thinking? How irresponsible could one man be? They would have to take out loans. 𝐀𝐦 would have to work incredibly strong, maybe more than 2 jobs. Could Izuku get a job? He was too young, but maybe someone would pay him to get their groceries or walk their dogs or clean their yards. If he could earn enough to pay for groceries every month, that could certainly take a burden off his mother's shoulders, but how much did groceries cost? He still needed to go to school, and high school. Tuition isn't paid for by the government, but maybe he could get a scholarship. He was aiming for you, after all, and what was that burning smell? "Mom!" Izuku shouted, interrupting the muttering he was unaware he was doing. "Dinner's burning." 𝐀𝐦 shot up like a rocket. Oh dear me," she said to herself as she ran into the kitchen. Izuku sighed, exhausted, and stood up. "I'll be in my room," he called to his mom, and then slinked into her bathroom to snag the sewing kit and hairdryer. Once in his room with the door safely closed, Izuku reached under his bed and pulled out the antibiotic ointment, gauze patches, and bandages he bought regularly from the dollar store. He took off his shirt and began to apply the ointment to his arm. This was probably a severe first-degree burn, or maybe a mild second-degree, but the skin wasn't open or bleeding, so he proceeded. The ointment was cool but the pressure stung. Izuku in his breath and slowly pressed the gauze in place, then secured it with a bandage. He learned how to do this years ago with the help of YouTube. Next was his shirt. First he took a pair of small scissors and cut away the smoldered cloth. Then he chose a blue thread and began to stitch up his shirt sleeve. The colors didn't exactly match, but he's done this often enough and his mom never noticed. He had about 3 other shirts with Izuku-made stitches, all long-sleeved like this one. It was like a trap, he thought. He could wear a short-sleeve shirt to school, which was better for the weather, but then he would have to expose his previous burn scars to the world, and any potential burns would hurt a lot worse. He preferred to wear a long-sleeve shirt, deal with the oppressive heat, and have that extra layer of protection. It wasn't often that Katsuki burned him directly anyway. When Izuku was finished, the stitches looked more like a child was given a blue-colored pencil and was allowed to color all over his shirt sleeve, but the hole was closed and that was enough for him. He packed up his supplies and stretched his arms. His final task before his mother caught him was to dry his backpack and papers, so he peeked outside to make sure she was still fretting over dinner. She was, so Izuku plugged in the hairdryer, took out his textbooks, and began. He'd get in trouble for the condition of the textbooks, but there wasn't anything he could do about that. As the papers slowly, so slowly, oh my god, dried, Izuku's eyes strayed to his desk where he usually does his homework. Ah! There was the unopened birthday box. Did he want to open it? He should write. It was the last thing Hisashi gave Izuku, the last thing that might have actual sentimental value, might have more thought put behind it than what was left to him in the will. But if he opened it, and it wasn't anything like that, he would be devastated. Izuku pointed the dryer at a different page. He still felt bitter that Hisashi was always absent. Izuku grew up without a father to teach him boyish things, to shower his mother in the love she deserved. Why should Izuku accept this gift? When he was younger, Izuku thought that Hisashi never came home because he was quirkless, and for a few months he hated his father. But 𝐀𝐦 eased those thoughts, explaining that Hisashi was simply strong at work overseas, and loved Izuku and his quirklessness. He loved me, Izuku thought. He wanted me to open this birthday present. Izuku off the hairdryer. Silence fell over the room as he faced down the innocent-looking cardboard box. It wasn't very big, about the size of a shoebox. He stared at it, it stared back at him. He sat like that for a number of minutes, trying to work up the courage to open the DMN thing. Right, he huffed, forcing himself up without his hands. His balance was slightly off, but he managed to not fall. Step 1 down. He took a step towards the box. Okay. Another step. Good. And then he was standing in front of his desk, looking down at it. It seemed so innocuous, and yet its contents had the power to shape Izuku's final opinion of his late father. Geez. Maybe he was thinking about this too strong. Izuku took a sharpened pencil and stabbed through the yellow tape, tearing down until he could use his hands to rip open the cardboard flaps. Paper and bubble wrap greeted him, as well as a single sticky note laying on the top. In Hisashi's professional handwriting was written, "You're probably old enough to know about this. Use it, if you want. It should fit. Maybe don't tell your mom. Love, Dad." With slightly shaking hands, Izuku removed the coverings to reveal a mask. It was a kitsune mask, with a black strap around the back to keep it attached to the wearer's head. Feeling it, Izuku could tell the material was durable, flexible 𝐴𝐻𝐻. The first layer of paint was white, like most kitsune masks. The fox's ears were big and painted a deep red. 2 black lines traced the cheekbones on either side, and black paint outlined the large eye holes inside a red line that started at the tear ducts and whisked to the temples. A design of red and gold adorned the fox's forehead above red eyebrows. The fox's nose protruded so that it would shield the wearer's lower face from above, but there was nothing completely covering the mouth or jaw. Why was Izuku given this? A knock at the door had him quickly shoving the mask back into the box and closing it. "Maybe don't tell your mom," rang inside his head in Hisashi's low, amused voice. "See, come in." Izuku shouted once he was sure that the mask was hidden. 𝐀𝐦 opened the door just enough to show her face. "Dinner's ready. It's a little crispy, though," she said with a light chuckle at her own expense. She looked down and saw the mess on the floor and gasped. "Oh, Izuku. Is that your backpack? What happened?" "Ah, he forgot to hide his still damp papers. I might have gotten caught in the rain," he tried. 𝐀𝐦 frowned. "It didn't rain today, though." "Oh. Well, it rained near my school. Must have just missed here," Izuku said, smiling reassuringly. 𝐀𝐦 didn't look convinced, but she dropped it, leaving Izuku to prepare for dinner. He let out a breath and turned back to the box with the mask inside. Izuku tapped the box flaps and watched them bounce back. His lips turned down as he did it again. Opening the present was unhelpful. He was hoping for closure, maybe, but all he got was more questions. He could deal with that later, though. For now, it was food time. When he washed his hands and entered the kitchen, he saw his mom reading the 4th page of the will again. Her plate was untouched in front of her, and Izuku's plate sat across from her. Izuku sat down, watching her closely. Her brow was furrowed, and Izuku could see the dark circles prominent under her eyes. Izuku reached over and plucked the paper out of her hands. She looked up at him in surprise, apparently not aware that he had sat down. He smiled at her again, being sure to make it as bright as possible. "It's okay, Mom," he said. "We'll figure something out. We always do, right?" 𝐀𝐦 in a breath as she looked at her son. Her eyes were shiny as she said, yes, you're right. Izuku forced his smile even wider. Now, let's eat. The food was more smoky than it usually was, but it was still delicious. They ate in silence for a while, until 𝐀𝐻𝐭 cleared her throat. Izuku put down his glass and gave his full attention to his mother. She looked serious. So, Izuku, the debt is going to cause some significant differences in our lives, 𝐀𝐻𝐭 said. Yeah. Izuku said. One of those changes, as I mentioned before, is that we have to move, she said. Izuku blinked. Right. She had said that. Okay, but why? This apartment's rent was paid for completely by your father, and I'm afraid that any job I get won't be enough to cover that cost. Tomorrow while you're at school I have an appointment with a banker to set up a schedule to pay off his debt. That added expense will make things tight for us. We need to move somewhere a little cheaper, which means you'll probably have to change schools. I know that means you have to leave your friends behind, but you understand, right? 𝐀𝐻𝐭's strained smile fell a little at that last question. He'll have to leave his friends behind. Yeah, not likely. Of course I understand, Mom, Izuku said. Wherever we move, it'll be home. 𝐀𝐻𝐭's shoulders slumped. You're such a good boy, she said. She stood up, taking his empty plate. Go finish drying out your things, now, dear. And make sure you compress them, or they'll get stiff. Yes ma'am, Izuku said, standing up. When he was behind closed doors again, he couldn't help but cheer quietly to himself, pumping his fist in the air. He was moving away. Away from Katsuki. Away from the bullies. There would be new people he could meet, peers who didn't know about his quirklessness or his hero dreams. Nice classmates. Potential friends. Potential bullies, too. But not if Izuku could help it. Izuku wanted to be a hero. Always had, always will. Despite what his doctors, teachers, and classmates said, Izuku was going to be a cool hero who saved lots of people. And if these new classmates would accept him for once, then maybe he could ignore the pain in his chest when he thought about what they were sacrificing. It was going to be a strong transition. 𝐀𝐻𝐭 would have to work, which meant that Izuku would have to get used to not having his mom home all the time. He didn't know what it was like to not have her by his side, coming to family day at school, being there when he got home. He would miss that, just as he knew he would miss the regular phone calls from Hisashi. He would even miss Katsuki, in a way. Something about the rowdy boy was so routine and simple, something he could expect every day. Even when no one else wanted to be around Izuku, Katsuki was always there, poking fun at him for being a nerd or whatever else he could come up with. But there were only 2 trimesters left of elementary school, and then Izuku would basically be a real grown-up teenager. He could handle being alone a little bit. Especially if it meant he wouldn't have to buy ointment anymore. The papers were nearly dry, crinkling in a way that told Izuku that he might have to rewrite everything anyway. Another few minutes and he would finally be able to finish his homework and start working on his journals. He looked up and his eye caught the box where the kitsune mask was hiding. Izuku didn't know what that was about, but he'll accept the gift as it was. It was a pretty mask, at least. Maybe he could hang it up as a decorative piece. Use it, if you want. The papers were dry enough. Izuku dismissed them, walked over and took the mask back out of its box. It should fit. Izuku slid the mask over his face, tightening the strap. It did fit relatively well, although it was a bit too big still. The eye holes were large enough that he could see about as good as he would if he weren't wearing anything at all. The 𝐿THR was soft and smelled clean, and now he could tell that it was worn down in a few places on the inside, like at the top of the snout and around the eyes. Hisashi had worn this before, probably many times. Doing what? Theater. Izuku turned around and looked at himself in the mirror. The red and gold paint complemented his dark green hair and emerald eyes. He looked pretty cool, he thought. He still had no idea what he could use it for, but he liked it. Thanks, Dad, he thought, smiling fondly. I'll be sure to wear this, too. Once, when Izuku was 7, he made a friend named Yui. She was in Izuku's class for about 3 months because she moved around a lot and couldn't stay. Her quirk was that she could ripen fruits and vegetables by touching them, so it wasn't anything special, but Izuku found it amazing all the same. Yui understood the difficulties surrounding quirklessness. She had 2 quirkless parents and 3 quirkless siblings, so Izuku not having one didn't even make her blink an eye. Maybe she pitied Izuku, or maybe she actually found him nice enough to befriend, but she stuck around for the entire 3 months that she was in Izuku's class, even when she became a target for teasing too. They became such good friends that Izuku was able to see her off on the day she moved. Her apartment had looked so empty, everything packed up in labeled cardboard boxes and stacked in the back of a large truck. Not that she had many personal items or decorations anyway. Izuku remembered feeling melancholy walking through the empty hallways. Yui's bedroom had seemed so sad, as if the walls themselves would miss her. Izuku wouldn't blame them. Yui was the nicest thing to ever happen to him. Staring at the bare walls of his own bedroom, once covered in a floor-to-ceiling collage of posters and photographs, Izuku remembered Yui. He hoped she was doing well. Izuku. 𝐀𝐦 voice rang from the living room. That's everything. It's time to go. Coming. Izuku shouted back, but he couldn't move from where he was standing in the doorway of his bedroom. He had been excited at the prospect of moving. Giddy, even. But now that the day had come, Izuku found he didn't want to leave. There were too many memories here, in the paler areas on the floor where the hardwood finish had faded, in the pencil scribbles by the baseboard where a younger Izuku had doodled, in the broken outlet, the slanted curtain rod, the window that got stuck if it wasn't pushed strong enough. Izuku didn't realize he was crying until a hand was placed on his shoulder. He looked up, sniffling, at his mother, whose expression was so sad and kind that he couldn't help but hug her. She rubbed his back soothingly, but he felt her own tears landing on his shirt. "You know, your father really loved this apartment," she said. "He said that there was a lot of light. He made sure the curtains were always open, do you remember that?" Izuku nodded into her shoulder. He felt like he should apologize to Hisashi for having to leave this place he loved, even though it was his fault. Eventually Izuku's tears stopped and he could breathe normally again, so he pushed away from his mother and turned one more time back to his old bedroom. Izuku took out his phone and snapped a quick picture of the room. This was the place he grew up in. He couldn't help being sentimental. "Let's go," 𝐀𝐦 said, smiling although her eyes were red. Izuku nodded again, and together they went out to the moving truck, passing the kitchen where countless meals had been eaten, the living room where they used to watch old hero movies, the door that led to a balcony where they could see their city. Izuku breathed in once more before walking out the door. The apartment smelled like coffee and his mother's cooking. The apartment smelled like dust and rotting wood. Izuku and 𝐀𝐦 stood in the gen-can of their new home, shock on their faces as they gawked at the state of it. They knew coming in that the place would be small, but no one said that it would be in such disrepair. Apartment 104 was on the ground floor of the 5-story complex. The living room was to the immediate left of the entryway, which only seemed to have enough space for a television and one couch. To the right was a coat closet, and then a small area where a table could be placed. Behind a low counter was the tiny kitchen. Farther into the apartment was a hallway with 2 bedrooms branching off on either side, one slightly bigger than the other, and then one full bathroom at the very end of the hallway. Large windows let natural light into the living room and MSTR bedroom. An overhead light shone dimly in the bedrooms, kitchen, and bathroom, but no lights had been installed in the living room or closet for whatever reason. The whole area felt dark and cramped. But the size wasn't what surprised them. The walls of the apartment seemed to not have been painted in a decade, if the peeling and stains were any clue. The faucets, even when turned to the highest setting, released water at such a low pressure that washing took twice as long. The carpet floor was flat and brown. The lights shone brightly enough to be sufficient but just dimly enough to be irritating. The windows were stuck. The shower was cold. The dishwasher was broken. The air conditioning was weak. Izuku knew better than to complain. Once they moved all their boxes inside, the cramping was significantly worse. They had sold a lot of furniture, knowing very well that they would not have the room, and they were right to do so. 𝐬𝐻𝐸, used to sleeping off the ground, was forced to sell his bed frames and mattress and buy a futon with the money. 𝐬𝐻𝐸's room was the smaller windowless one, and he considered not putting up all of his posters, if only to make it seem bigger. As it was, there was only enough space for his drawers and a desk against the wall. He was beginning to feel claustrophobic. That weekend was spent mostly unpacking. 𝐬𝐻𝐸 did eventually put up some hero posters, but only half, and only those of All Might. The others stayed in a box in the back of his closet with the kitsune mask. He placed action figures on top of his dresser and his notebook stacked on his desk, as well as a small All Might-themed lamp. Yellow curtains were hung up by the windows in 𝐀𝐻𝐸's room to create the illusion of sunlight where there was hardly any, and they hung up a tapestry in the living room over the worst of the wall damage. Floor lamps were put wherever they could fit, including a multicolored one that 𝐀𝐻𝐸 had originally wanted to give away, just to lighten up the place. A shrine to Hisashi was set up in the living room in the tiny space on the wall between the couch and television. By the time they were finished, it almost felt like home. Then it was Monday, and 𝐬𝐻𝐸 was terrified. August had rolled to a humid and hazy end, trailing September behind it with a sudden cool breeze that ruffled the still green leaves. The school year was mostly over. Everyone would already have friend groups, having known each other all throughout elementary school, and wasn't it weird that he was entering a new school right before graduation to junior high? How was he going to introduce himself? Would people think he was awkward? Would he tell them that he was quirkless? Would he actually be able to make friends? 𝐬𝐻𝐸, sweetie, you're scaring yourself, 𝐀𝐻𝐸 said, handing her son his bento. He was standing in the gen can, backpack on, dressed in his usual long sleeves and she his forehead without mentioning that he had been mumbling for the last 5 minutes. She was used to it, after all. Mom, do I have to go? 𝐬𝐻𝐸 said. 𝐀𝐻𝐸 smiled gently. Yes, and you better get a move on. I have a job interview in an hour. 𝐬𝐻𝐸 let out a shaky breath, slowly opened the door, and stepped out into the enclosed area leading out to the street. I'm off, then, he said, trying to sound cheery despite the shakiness in his voice. Good luck, 𝐬𝐻𝐸, his mom called after him. 𝐬𝐻𝐸 spun on his heel and began the trek through the neighborhood to his new school. Standing in front of Class 6D, 𝐬𝐻𝐸 desperately wished for a nice hole to fall into. He wrote his name in his fast and scraggly handwriting on the chalkboard, then turned around to face his new class. About 30 faces stared curiously back at him. 𝐬𝐻𝐸 could immediately identify the mutation quirks, like the boy in the front row who had pink scales instead of skin, the girl with stegosaurus plates on her back, and the student in the back who was made of marble. 𝐬𝐻𝐸 said intelligently, my name is Midoriya 𝐬𝐻𝐸. I just moved here, with my mom. Please take care of me. He shouted that last sentence a bit louder than necessary, bowing lowly to the class to hide his flushed cheeks. Thank you, Midoriya-kun, you can take a seat in the back next to Noboru-kun, the teacher said. 𝐬𝐻𝐸 peeked up to see a boy in the back right corner waving at him. 𝐬𝐻𝐸 sat down next to Noboru, who didn't stop grinning at 𝐬𝐻𝐸 the entire time. 𝐬𝐻𝐸 could feel his eyes on him as the class continued, like he was trying to get his attention without making a scene, but 𝐬𝐻𝐸 kept his eyes faced forwards. He had no idea how to deal with people who were actually friendly, and he already pushed himself far enough today. But class had to end eventually. When the bell rang for lunch, 𝐬𝐻𝐸's desk was immediately swarmed with well-meaning but overexcited children. Hey, new kid, where are you from? What's your quirk? Can you show us? Are you liking it here? Come on, man, what's your quirk? Well, 𝐬𝐻𝐸 tried to say, but the words seemed to be caught in his throat. The only time this many people surrounded his desk was to pick on him, tear a page out of his notebook, kick his chair over, or spark an explosion next to his face. 𝐬𝐻𝐸 gulped. These kids aren't like that, he reminded himself. They're not mean. They're harmless. So why couldn't he speak? Guys, give him space, a new voice said to his left. Izuku looked over and saw Noboru glaring at his classmates, calmly taking out his own lunch. To Izuku's surprise, their classmates actually listened. They all immediately took a step back, looking sheepish. Izuku was getting tired of not knowing what to say. Noboru smiled politely at Izuku. Sorry about that. This class is really loud sometimes. Don't throw us under the bus, Noboru, a girl with blue skin and purple eyes, pouted. Noboru laughed, and Izuku found that the sound brightened the room. Was that just in his head? You're right, sorry. Anyway, my name is Noboru Akio. Midoriya, we'd like to be friends with you. Noboru Akio was taller than Izuku, but not by much. He had deep indigo hair pulled back into a short ponytail, beige skin, brown eyes, and a dark brown birthmark stretching over his right temple. The boy emitted an air of ease and confidence, which almost set off Izuku's warning bells, but he forcefully turned them off. Izuku blushed. Thank you, Noboru-kun, he squeaked. I'd like to be friends, too. Noboru smiled again, and Izuku felt calmer. Dude, drop the honorific, it's fine. So, Midoriya, would you mind answering the question on all of our minds, he said. All of their classmates leaned forward slightly, eager for his answer. Oh, sure, my quirk, Izuku said. His heart rate spiked right back up as he glanced around at all the faces awaiting his response. What would he tell them all? Would they take back their invitation of friendship if they learned that he was quirkless? Would they hurt him? No, probably not. His former classmates only hurt him because he thought he could be a quirkless hero. Quirkless people weren't allowed to be anything. It was the fact that he was stupid enough to tell someone his dreams, coupled with his inherent weakness, that made him a target. If he told this group that he was quirkless, but didn't mention becoming a hero, maybe they would leave him alone. It was a good plan, but that wasn't what came out of his mouth. I have an analysis quirk, Izuku declared, then immediately felt the blood drain from his face. His classmates exclaimed all around him, lighting up with excitement. They all started talking at once, which overwhelmed the shocked Izuku. Guys, space. Noboru said, raising his voice. The classmates immediately shrank back again, leaving Izuku to marvel at the level of obedience. A quirk, or was Noboru that respected? Feared. That's cool, Midoriya. What do you analyze? Izuku still couldn't believe he just lied straight through his teeth. The analysis quirk idea was something he'd entertained briefly last night when he was too nervous to sleep, and he didn't actually think he'd use it. But it was too late to take it back. I analyze quirks, mostly. Especially heroes' quirks. I actually keep journals for it, he said. Really? Noboru said. Do you have one with you? Can we see? As luck would have it, Izuku did have volume 7 with him. He had brought it planning to record his classmates' quirks after school, if only to have something to write about when he was bored. He took it out of his backpack and opened it up to a page on the hero onslaught. Read it out loud, Noboru encouraged. With the curious and eager faces surrounding them, so different from the angry and taunting ones he was used to seeing, Izuku couldn't refuse. Hero, onslaught. Civilian name, Adachi Hayo. Quirk, frigidity. Allows user to tighten opponent's muscles and calvatize opponent's joints incrementally with each instant of physical contact. Estimated 15 hits or 30 seconds of prolonged contact before opponent is completely paralyzed. Strengths. If the user can gain a speed advantage over his opponent, most fights will be quick and safe. Quirk does not rely on the environment and can be used at the owner's discretion. Fights tend to be non-destructive as the quirk itself is limited to the people involved, and can limit opponents' movements. Although it is not a flashy quirk, and therefore not ideal for publicity, it allows for precise and showy moves when the situation allows. Weaknesses. During Onslaught vs Amanita, Onslaught cracks his neck 5 minutes into battle and rolls his shoulders after Amanita's capture. During Onslaught and Lupus v. The Storks, Onslaught pauses to stretch his back for 5 seconds, allowing Lupus to be hit by a Stork's quirk, an attack that would have been easy to block from Onslaught's position. These battles were short and well below Onslaught's physical limit, so his body should not have been under enough duress for him to show weakness in front of cameras. Therefore, I hypothesize that frigidity works in an indirect relationship between total usage and user's physical abilities. As the opponent becomes unable to move freely, so does the user, albeit at a slower rate. Quirk is also useless in rescue situations and situations involving villains with non-tangible bodies, such as in the fight with the villain Firestorm. Over-reliance on Quirk causes Onslaught to be unable to stay calm and think on his feet when he cannot to fight. As a villain, the best way to avoid defeat would be to purposefully be directly hit, but at spaced-out intervals, allowing own joints to unlock while adding stress to the user. Onslaught should carry muscle relaxant and fast-acting arthritis medication on his person. When Izuku looked up from his notebook, he saw various emotions on his classmates' faces. Most were still smiling, but there was a note of confusion in the turn of their eyebrows. "Wow!" Noboru exclaimed from right next to Izuku's ear, startling him. "I didn't even understand half of those words, but it sounded super smart." "You're really cool, Midoriya." "You're a shitty, useless nerd, Deku." "Why you think so?" he asked. Noboru's smile shone like the sun. "Heck yeah, dude." It was the best lunch Izuku had had since the first grade. Izuku learned that Noboru's quirk was called Sunny Disposition. Whenever he smiled, those surrounding him immediately felt content. He'd used it many times to help others out of bad moods or to calm someone down. It was no wonder why he was so popular, but it helped that Noboru was also just a genuinely amicable person, not to mention a natural leader. Not like how Katsuki was a natural leader, though. Katsuki ruled by using status and fear, Noboru led by using respect and friendliness. Even without his quirk, Izuku had no doubt that they would have gotten along. "It isn't always that great though," Noboru said. The day was over, and he and Izuku sat in the emptying classroom finishing their lunches before they went home since they talked too long to eat properly earlier. Izuku had texted his mom to make sure that she was alright, and that he would start home soon. She replied, saying she was looking forward to hearing about his first day. For the past couple weeks, 𝐀𝐦 seemed to get lost in her head less often, so Izuku no longer felt the need to rush home whenever he went out. "How come?" Izuku said. "People like to assume that because of my quirk I'm cheerful all the time. Or that if I'm upset, I can use my quirk on myself." "Which just isn't true," Noboru said, popping broccoli in his mouth. Izuku hummed. "I can see how that would be a problem." "Yeah," Noboru said. There was a pause as Izuku rewrapped his bento in the all-might cloth his mother used. "Then, so?" Izuku looked up, confused. "So, what?" Noboru leaned over to whisper conspiratorially. "So, analyze my quirk." "Oh. Right, it would make sense that his new friends would want him to use his fake quirk on them." Izuku put his finger on his bottom lip and looked at his desk while he thought. "Well, one wouldn't assume right off the bat that your quirk would be useful in hero work. But that isn't necessarily true. Your quirk would be entirely useful in rescue situations, calming down survivors, or helping someone through a panic or anxiety attack. If you didn't want to be a hero, you would do great as a therapist, social worker, or basically any other job that requires someone with a level head in sensitive situations. If used offensively, it's possible you could pacify a villain, making them easier to detain. Without confirmation, I'm guessing that the bigger your smile, the stronger the effect. Does your smile work even when you aren't happy? Well, assuming that it does, that could be incredibly draining, and it would make you easy to take advantage of. You would have to be very careful of how you use it if you don't want to end up in the mindset where you must pretend to be happy to make the people around you happy. Midoriya if your smile doesn't work when you yourself aren't happy, then does the emotion behind your smile matter? Would a sad smile still bring comfort, or maybe acceptance as a variation of contentedness, or maybe have no effect at all? It would require testing to find out. "Midoriya!" Noboru yelled, startling Izuku out of his thoughts. Izuku, realizing what he just did, blushed profusely. Ah. Noboru-kun. I'm so sorry, I know you wanted me to analyze it but I went pretty far and it got a little personal there. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to offend you if I dude, Midoriya, shut up for a second, said Noboru, gesturing with his hands for him to calm down. Izuku snapped his mouth shut with an audible clack. He was so stupid, Noboru probably thought he was a shitty nerd now too. He shouldn't have said anything, he was going to ruin his first friendship, and Katsuki would have been right all along, but then Noboru started laughing, a warm laugh that stilled Izuku's rushing thoughts. Izuku gawked at Noboru, perplexed at why the other boy seemed so amused. Oh, dude, you're a riot, Noboru said, beaming. Izuku instantly felt better. In the back of his mind, he thanked sunny disposition. You really nerded out there for a minute and it was amazing. But if you actually let me answer some of your questions, then maybe your analysis would be more accurate or something, right? Izuku sighed. He stood up, holding his wrapped bento, and shrugged on his backpack. You're right, Noboru-kun, he said. Sorry. Hey, I said drop the honorific. Noboru said, standing up as well. Do you want to walk home together? Izuku offered. You can tell me more about your quirk, if you want, or we can talk about something else. Noboru agreed to walk home together, but for the first few minutes the conversation had lapsed into a comfortable silence. Noboru seemed to be thinking about something, so Izuku took the opportunity to observe his surroundings. He had been too nervous this morning to pay much attention, but now that he was looking around, he noticed a few things. This side of town was obviously more poor than where Izuku had come from. They never passed any standalone houses. Every residence was either an apartment or townhome, each with unkempt lawns and cracked driveways. The asphalt on the road had many potholes and Izuku had to catch himself from tripping on the uneven sidewalks. People's yards were usually guarded with chain-link fences. The businesses they passed were all small and family-owned, except for the occasional convenience store. The alleys here were darker, narrower, dirtier. The street lamps were few and far between. Izuku hadn't had the opportunity yet to see this place at night, but he doubted it would be a relaxing experience. Hey, Midoriya, Noboru said. Izuku looked over, but Noboru was staring straight ahead. Yeah. You like heroes, right? Something in the other boy's voice made Izuku hesitate. Yeah, I do. Noboru finally looked over and met Izuku's eyes. He didn't seem angry, but he was serious. That's cool and all when you're doing your quirk thing, but you shouldn't really advertise it around these parts. Izuku frowned. Why not? Noboru stopped walking, so Izuku stopped with him. Around them, the shadows seemed darker than they were when they left school. The sun was descending, lighting the sky on fire, illuminating the sides of brick buildings, and turning Noboru's dark eyes into a golden brown that seemed almost wolfish. It made Izuku want to back away, but he held still. Heroes aren't widely respected here, Noboru said, voice low. I know you just moved, but you'll see for yourself soon enough that they don't care about us. Heroes are useless when there's no cameras around, and no news crews ever come here unless something big happens. You're probably used to walking down the street and witnessing a hero fight right there in broad daylight, aren't you? It wasn't a mean accusation, but somehow the fact that it was true made Izuku feel guilty. He nodded. Yeah, that doesn't really happen around here. Villains attack, but they don't make a stunt out of it. They're usually just low-level criminals trying to make a quick buck. No one is really alerted until it's too late, and the police are real slow. Most of the time the police can't or won't do anything, because the quirks in this neighborhood can range from semi-useful, like mine, to downright villainous, like a few of our classmates. Izuku began to protest that, when Noboru cut in, waving a hand. I don't mean that they're villains. All our classmates are really nice. I just mean that they could hurt someone if they're not careful. Not to mention, a good percentage of the population in this town is quirkless. That made Izuku tense. He couldn't look away from Noboru's face. Really? Noboru stared back at Izuku. Yeah. It was silent between them as Izuku processed this. After a second, it was Noboru who broke the eye contact to continue speaking. Quirkless people don't really get the chance to make it in life, do they? A lot die young, apparently. Those who live long enough to finish school have a strong time getting jobs. They end up in places like this. Izuku's hands were clenched into fists at his side, his right fist grasping the bento and wrinkling the cloth. They turn to villainy, some of them. Others grow old and sad. Others die. No matter what, I've never seen a happy quirkless person. And there's a lot of bitter ones here. Izuku didn't want to hear this. It was something he had always been told, that he had no future. That was part of why he wanted to be a hero, to blaze a trail for other quirkless kids to follow, to tell them you, too, can be a hero. He started walking again, head down. His shirt was sticking to his body in places he was sweating, and he idly thought that he could now start wearing short sleeves until it got cold. After a few steps, he heard Noboru start to follow him again. "Sorry," Noboru said, sounding less serious now. "I didn't mean to upset you or anything. It's not that bad here, really. We do have some people protecting the community, like certain underground groups, but I don't know too much about that." "Oh." Noboru jumped in front of Izuku, making him instinctively look up. "There is one hero we like around here. Eraserhead." Eraserhead. The name was familiar, but I don't know about them, Izuku admitted. He kept walking, forcing Noboru to talk and walk backwards. "They're an underground hero who actually gets things done. The only thing I've heard is that they quirk can nullify other people's quirks. Isn't that cool?" "Yeah," Izuku said. "It's really cool." And it was, but Izuku was suddenly not in the mood to geek out about it. Noboru silently watched Izuku for a bit while Izuku focused on his feet. "Hey," Noboru said, voice apologetic. "I really did upset you earlier, talking about the quirkless, didn't I?" "It's okay," Izuku said honestly. He knew he didn't mean to bring up bad thoughts. "I'm sorry anyway. Do you, know someone who's quirkless?" Izuku met Noboru's eyes again. From this angle, the boy's brown eyes were cast in shadow again, diminishing the predator-like effect they had earlier. "I do," Izuku said. He forced himself to smile. "Don't worry about it, okay?" Noboru smiled back, easing the atmosphere. He spun around so that he was walking side by side with Izuku again. "Okay." They were coming up on Izuku's apartment complex. "This is me," Izuku said. Noboru gasped. "No way." Izuku looked at him, curious. "What? I live here too." "Number 207. Noboru exclaimed. Izuku gaped. "I'm 104. Noboru beamed. "Nice. Dude. We can hang out whenever." Izuku nodded, excited all over again. "That sounds like fun." They had stopped in front of Izuku's door, since it came up first. "How about we walk to school, too? I leave about half an hour before the first bell." "Sounds good, my friend," Noboru said, patting Izuku on the back. "I'll see you in the morning, then." And he ran up the flight of stairs at the end of the building, soon out of sight. Izuku breathed a sigh of relief. It had gotten close. There for a minute, but he was just glad that he was able to change the subject away from quirklessness. Right now, all Izuku wanted was to hear his mom talk about her job interview and write about sunny disposition and Eraserhead's supposed quirk in his notebook. As he unlocked the door and walked inside the small apartment, Izuku couldn't help but smile softly to himself. It had been a pretty good first day. His mother was sitting at the kitchen table reading a book, and when she saw Izuku, her face lit up. "I'm home," Izuku said. "Welcome home," Inko said. She seemed truly happy for the first time in over a month. A good day for both of them, then. "You okay, Midoriya?" "You look dead on your feet," Noboru said in lieu of a greeting as Izuku left his apartment. Well, aren't you the flatterer, 𝐬𝐡𝐢𝐬 grumbled. He didn't get much sleep last night, staying up on his phone trying to find information on Eraserhead. There wasn't much to find except for a couple of blurry videos, a 3-minute phone interview from 9 years ago, and one unconfirmed picture of someone who might be Eraserhead. They were incredible at hiding from the spotlight. It only made them more intriguing. 𝐬𝐡𝐢𝐬 was regretting the decision to stay up late, however. 𝐀𝐦 only lets him have 1 cup of coffee before school, so he was irritable and unfocused. But his notebook was satisfied for now. Noboru put his hand on 𝐬𝐡𝐢𝐬's shoulder to stop him as he tried to walk. I'm serious. If you're not feeling well, you should stay home today. 𝐬𝐡𝐢𝐬 tried for a reassuring smile. I'm okay, Noboru. Let's just go. If you're sure. Noboru relented. The walk to school was pleasant. 𝐬𝐡𝐢𝐬 was wearing short sleeves to school for the first time in years, and the September breeze on his bare arms felt amazing. The sky was a clear blue, the scent of mowed grass was in the air, and 𝐬𝐡𝐢𝐬 slowly felt himself cheering up. Until Noboru spoke again. Hey, I forgot to ask this yesterday, but was there a reason you moved? 𝐬𝐡𝐢𝐬's mood plummeted. He turned to Noboru, who was walking to his left, and tried not to glare. My dad died, was all he said, unwilling to go into the details. Noboru winced, and 𝐬𝐡𝐢𝐬 felt bad for his bluntness. I'm sorry to hear that. It's okay, 𝐬𝐡𝐢𝐬 said. It still hurts, especially for my mom, but we're okay. Neither of them spoke after that. They came up to the school, a small white brick building with a large field stretching to a forest at its back. There was no campus wall, so the front of the building directly faced the street. As they got closer, more students joined them until a crowd of kids were entering the front doors. 𝐬𝐡𝐢𝐬 kept his head down and skillfully dodged the other kids in the stuffed hallways, ducking under a suddenly outstretched arm, hopping over someone's dropped phone, twisting sideways to get between 2 students who were shoved together. For a school this small, there were way too many students. When they finally sat down, Noboru said, "That was fun to watch." 𝐬𝐡𝐢𝐬 frowned, taking out his pencil pouch and volume 7. What was? Noboru pointed at 𝐬𝐡𝐢𝐬. You. Swerving through that crowd like a snake or something. Did you have to practice that? 𝐬𝐡𝐢𝐬 shrugged. Bumping into people just causes more problems, he answered. He flipped open his notebook and began doodling a picture of Vlad King, a young hero with a versatile BLD quirk who was on the news that morning. He was so focused on his sketch that he didn't see the hand coming. It grabbed his forearm, and maybe it was the exhaustion, or maybe it was reflex, but 𝐬𝐡𝐢𝐬 tensed so suddenly that he dropped his pencil. His eyes shot up to meet Noboru's curious eyes. Brown. Not red. Noboru slowly removed his hand, but 𝐬𝐡𝐢𝐬 didn't relax. He couldn't. He opened his mouth to speak, to ask if he needed something, but nothing came out. Noboru's expression morphed into one of such profound understanding that for a second 𝐬𝐡𝐢𝐬 thought that maybe he had accidentally said something after all. He turned in his seat so that he was facing 𝐬𝐡𝐢𝐬 directly. Sorry, the indigo-haired boy said. I shouldn't have startled you when I knew you didn't get much sleep. He smiled, activating sunny disposition, and 𝐬𝐡𝐢𝐬 felt the tension drain from his muscles. Don't worry about it, 𝐬𝐡𝐢𝐬 said, voice barely above a whisper. I do want to ask, though, Noboru said, is that a burn on your arm? The injury Katsuki gave 𝐬𝐡𝐢𝐬 2 weeks ago was mostly healed, but there was still a pink, flaky area of skin about half the size of a palm on his upper arm. It was visible because of his short sleeves, along with a white star-shaped mark near his right wrist where he had once been grabbed and a red bumpy scar on his right elbow where he landed when he was once shoved to the ground. There were similar marks on his legs where he bruised himself trying to run and scraped his knees, and 2 equally sized burst marks on either side of his spine where 𝐘𝐦 once tried to push him super far with explosions. No doubt the still healing burn would leave another scar, but for now, all it did was peel and look kind of gross. This was something 𝐬𝐡𝐢𝐬 had been worried about. He hated questions like this, because as soon as he said that he was being bullied, somehow the blame was always placed on him. Heaven forbid a child with such a heroic quirk cause bodily harm to another student, so it must be the quirkless kid's fault. 𝐬𝐻𝐬 knew when he chose his outfit that he would be exposing some of his scars, but he felt so comfortable in this new classroom that he didn't worry about it. You're only comfortable here because you're lying to them, 𝐬𝐻𝐬's conscience reminded him. He elected to ignore it for now, because there was a question that needed answering. Yeah. There was an accident a few weeks ago. It's getting better, so don't worry, 𝐬𝐻𝐬 replied. He hoped the conversation would end there, but Noboru continued. A few weeks ago. And it's still that red. Did you see a doctor? No, 𝐬𝐻𝐬 said, and immediately regretted it. What? Midoriya. Noboru shouted, leaning forward into 𝐬𝐻𝐬's personal space, eyebrows furrowed and a scowl on his lips. You're telling me you treated that on your own? It looks like a really bad burn. You could have made it worse on accident. It wasn't that bad, really. 𝐬𝐻𝐬 said, waving his hands in a placating motion. I don't believe you, Noboru said. He leaned back against the wall and crossed his arms. But there's nothing we can do about that now. Promise me that if someone hurts you again, you'll tell me and get help. 𝐬𝐻𝐬 stared at Noboru, dumbfounded. And no one hurt me, Noboru. It was an accident. Noboru's glare at that statement was so searing that 𝐬𝐻𝐬 flinched. Don't lie to me. It helps no one. 𝐬𝐻𝐬 gulped and nodded. To promise. Noboru glared at him a second longer before his eyes softened. He turned back around in his chair as the teacher walked in. Good. 𝐬𝐻𝐬 didn't know how he was figured out so quickly, but he decided that Noboru's anger was not something he ever wanted directed at him ever again. He wondered idly as he took out his English book how someone with such a cheerful smile could have such a devastating frown. 𝐬𝐻𝐬 couldn't help it when his own lips stretched upwards, though. He had to admit, it felt good to be worried about. He went home alone that day. Sorry, Noboru had said, giving a sheepish smile, I have classroom duty on Tuesdays. So 𝐬𝐻𝐬 walked through the depleted neighborhood, watching the red sun hide behind buildings as he went. He wondered if his mom would be home by the time he got there. Yesterday's interview was a success, apparently, and they wanted her back for a second round of questioning. 𝐬𝐻𝐬 was happy for her. It had been so long since she had to work that she was anxious about getting hired. Perhaps she was skilled at selling herself, or maybe she just got lucky. Either way, if she lands this job, it will be a relief for both of them. It probably won't be enough to cover the bills, groceries, and debt payments, but once she gets a second job, they'll be good. She'll probably overwork herself, 𝐬𝐻𝐬 realized. If only he could find a way to make money too. He opened the door to his apartment. I'm home, he called, to no response. Kicking off his shoes, 𝐬𝐻𝐬 walked over to the shrine in the living room. Kneeling before the picture of his father, he rang the bell next to it. I'm home, Dad, he told him. He on the news for some background noise and plopped onto the couch, ready to take out his homework. Math was done, English was easy, did he finish that essay for history? And here we can see pro hero Honeybee making an appearance, a news reporter announced. 𝐬𝐻𝐬 looked up to see a tall woman wearing a yellow and black striped uniform flip her blonde hair and wink into the camera. Forget history. Before he knew it, his hero journal was in his hands and open to a new page. 𝐬𝐻𝐬 watched as the camera followed Honeybee. She leapt through the air, gliding on shimmering translucent wings. As she spun in an acrobatic twirl, a large black stinger grew from her tailbone and extended into a dangerously sharp point. The camera panned down to the street, where 𝐬𝐻𝐬 realized that this was a live report of a villain attack in the downtown area where he used to live. The villain was an older woman with flamingo pink hair who was wearing a masquerade mask and running down the street, carrying a sack filled with, presumably, money. Honeybee jumped after her, followed closely by the news crew. She seemed unable to properly fly with the fragile wings, but they allowed her to stay airborne for a few seconds longer. It was only a minute before she caught up to the other woman and engaged in combat. 𝐬𝐻𝐬 watched with rapt attention as Honeybee landed an uppercut on the woman's jaw, knocking her back several steps. The woman countered by pointing her open palm towards the hero, shooting from her skin purple electricity. Honeybee dodged and ran towards the woman, sweeping her feet from under her with a swift kick to the heel. The bag spilled as the villain fell to the street, revealing the kilograms of authentic jewels she had tried to steal. She sat up and pointed her palms desperately back at Honeybee, who was sauntering over, and unleashed a volley of purple bolts. Honeybee took to the skies to avoid the lightning, then pointed her stinger down at the villain and let gravity do the work as the villain gasped and tried to scramble away. 𝐬𝐻𝐸 almost closed his eyes, sure that the stinger would gruesomely impale the woman. But, at the last second, Honeybee beat her wings to halt her fall. The stinger pierced the woman's arm, hardly deep enough to draw blood, and some white liquid emitted from the stinger and entered the villain's bloodstream. The woman seized briefly, then her eyes rolled back to her head and her head hit the asphalt, unconscious. 𝐬𝐻𝐸 scribbled furiously in his notebook, trying to jot down everything he had seen. The villain was quickly detained by police officers as Honeybee turned towards the gathering audience, dusting off her uniform as if it was actually dirty. "Honeybee," the reporter said, gaining her attention. "Can you tell us about what you just did?" "Simple. I used my stinger to give that villain a little toxin to knock her out," Honeybee said, giggling cutely. "Don't worry. It's not a dangerous chemical. She'll be just fine after her little nap." "You're a fairly new hero, is that right?" the reporter asked. "This wasn't your debut, but it's only been a few weeks since you've been on the scene. What are your goals moving forward?" "My plan is to remain in this city for a while and take on as many villains as possible. It's the hero's job to ensure the safety of the people, after all." Honeybee winked into the camera again. 𝐬𝐻𝐸 frowned. Luckily, his silent question was asked by the reporter. "And afterwards? Will you expand towards less populated areas? There are already plenty of heroes in this area, after all." "There are. That just makes for more connections, don't ya think?" Honeybee said. Her sparkling blue eyes drifted away from the reporter, lingering for a second too long on the cheering audience. Her sweet smile grew at the edges, looking more greedy than charming, but only briefly. Honeybee turned her attention back to the reporter with grace. 𝐬𝐻𝐸 blinked, wondering if he had imagined that. He rewound 30 seconds and rewatched. Honeybee glanced over at the crowd, then there. Pause. 𝐬𝐻𝐸 scanned her body language, the hungry look in her eyes, the proud tilt of her chin, the elation of her chest. She was basking in the attention. She was lying, she only wanted to stay in the shiny, bustling urban streets in order to improve her own rank. What a fake, 𝐬𝐻𝐸 thought, then caught himself. He had never thought about a hero in that way before. It made him uneasy to think about such a positive influence in a negative light. Why now? An image of Noboru flashed through his mind, the predatory look he was wearing yesterday, the gleam in his eyes. Heroes aren't widely respected here. A feeling like realizing something awful fell over 𝐬𝐻𝐸, curdling in his gut. He flipped backwards in his notebook until he came across a move-by-move commentary of a hero fight he had saw last week on the news. He read it once, then dove for his backpack and retrieved a red pen. 𝐬𝐻𝐸 circled every instance in which the hero made an unnecessary play that could have cost precious moments. He put a star next to every instance of property damage. He underlined every time the hero looked directly into the camera. By the time he was finished, the page was more red ink than graphite. 𝐬𝐻𝐸 didn't record every single fight like this. He had just thought that this particular hero was stunning, so he wanted to make sure he could study their moves and copy them one day. Now he knew better. He had fallen into the trap, mesmerized by the impressiveness of how the battle looked, that he was blind to the terrible technique. Surely not all hero fights were like this, but it did make 𝐬𝐻𝐸 wonder. 𝐬𝐻𝐸 kept the screen paused on Honeybee's proud face and took out his phone. After opening the website for a local news station, it took him barely any time to find several articles about various crimes spanning the last few days. Rumors about someone selling drugs to teens. Suspected quirk trafficking in an area of town the sun doesn't shine. Public quirk usage from a woman terrorized by improperly trained police that ended with 4 people in the hospital. A back alley mugging. A stolen car. All events that would have gained attention had they taken place in the city. Where are the heroes here? Where are the showy moves, the throws of cameras, the applauding audiences? Heroes are useless when there's no cameras around, Noboru had told him. At the time, Izuku wasn't sure if he believed it. If a hero is doing their job, it shouldn't matter if they're being filmed. Besides, news stations had entire facilities actively searching out hero fights all the time. It would be impossible for a villain attack to go unnoticed, and so, a hero must be ready to be thrown into the spotlight. That was normal. But that wasn't entirely true. Some villain attacks are quiet. Some villain attacks happen in the dead of night, in poor neighborhoods where no one is around snooping. Some villain attacks are ambiguous, with people on more than one team vying against each other. Some villain attacks involve innocents with unstable quirks. And heroes don't care about these crimes because they can't be shown to the world in a colorful outfit and loud special attacks. That's what Noboru must have meant. For the next few hours, Izuku watched all of the hero fights he had recorded on the television. It was a lot, as 𝐀𝐦 didn't have many shows she liked to follow and didn't mind most of the storage going towards her son's passion. He noted all of the heroes who seemed to prioritize popularity over practicality, and decided to pick them apart, piece by piece. He had some deeper digging to do. After a moment's hesitation, he opened his phone and called a number he had gotten during lunch that day. "Hey, Noboru, are you home yet?" 𝐀𝐦 expected dinner to be ready by the time she got home. It wasn't uncommon for Izuku to begin cooking on his own when he realized she would be gone for the afternoon, and it was also simply polite for him to do so. She was surprised, then, when she unlocked the door to their apartment and saw neither prepared food nor her son. "Izuku," she called. Silence greeted her. She left her purse on the kitchen table and walked down the hallway. There was no sound coming from Izuku's room, but maybe he was doing his homework. 𝐀𝐦 knocked. "Izuku. I'm coming in." She opened the door. On the other side were the usual hero posters, action figures, and merch. But no son. Worried now, 𝐀𝐦 went back to the kitchen and pulled her phone out of her purse. She scrolled back through their texts, but saw nothing saying he wouldn't be home. The line was ringing before she had time to think. 1 ring. 2. 3. Then, hello. 𝐀𝐦 let out a breath. "Midoriya Izuku," she said in a too sweet voice, "where are you?" She could hear her son wince on the other side of the receiver. "Good. I'm at my friend's place." "And when were you going to tell me you were going to your friend's house?" Now. Come home." "Yes, ma'am." He hung up without argument. 𝐀𝐦 sighed and almost put her phone away when she remembered what he had said. Then she was calling Izuku right back. He picked up on the first ring. "Mom. I changed my mind. Stay there, and have fun." "Mom, are you okay?" 𝐀𝐦 could have laughed. "Yes, sweetie, I'm fine. We're still going to talk about this, but for now enjoy your time with your friend." "Okay, if you're sure." "Love you." "I love you too," and she was the one to hang up this time. 𝐀𝐦 fell onto the couch, tears building in her eyes as she stared at the blank television. Izuku had a friend. He had made a friend. A friend who wasn't Katsuki, not that that boy was ever gentle with her son. When was the last time Izuku had ever gone over to someone else's house after school? She couldn't remember, it must have been when he was still knee-high. She couldn't take this away from him, even if he had worried her at first. "Everything okay?" Noboru asked as Izuku sat back down next to his friend on his bedroom floor, still looking at his phone in confusion. Izuku pocketed his phone and shrugged off his backpack again, taking back out all the papers he had stuffed in there in his hurry. "I think so," Izuku said. She sounded mad at first, but she changed her mind. "Oh. Cool, I guess," Noboru said. His indigo hair was out of its usual ponytail, falling to his shoulders and curling slightly at the ends. The rest of the room matched his aesthetic, with blue walls, purple bedspread, white glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling, and shimmering teal curtains. Noboru, sprawled out on the carpet, grabbed a notebook and flipped back to the page he was examining before the first call. "So, you were saying." "Right." Izuku pointed to the list of names on the page. "These are the heroes I observed being vain or otherwise suspicious. I was wondering if you wanted to help me research them. If we can find good evidence that they are being false heroes, then I can make a post about each of them on this forum I'm part of, and we can injure their reputations for harming the hero industry." Noboru looked at Izuku for a while, brown boring into green, and Izuku started to feel as if he had made a mistake coming here. Was this foolish? He probably sounded obsessed, and they were only friends for a day. Izuku was just so eager to spend time with someone other than his mom, sure. Izuku blinked. "Ha! I'll help." Noboru smiled and stood up. "You're doing this because of what I said, right? It makes me feel good that you listened to me, so I'll listen to you. Plus, with your quirk, you're sure to WHP up an argument people will actually pay attention to." He walked over to his dresser and picked up a sleek silver laptop covered in an assortment of stickers, including a generic alien, a rainbow, a blooming sakura tree, and a trans pride flag. Once he sat back down, he opened the laptop and gestured to the notebook without looking at it. "Who's first?" Izuku stared at his friend. Then, slowly, a grin spread across his face. He really lucked out by coming to this school, didn't he? Even though each time his quirk was mentioned guilt shot through him, he was unwilling to tell the truth and risk the friendship. "Maybe one day. Just not now." "First up is native," Izuku said. Noboru grunted and began typing, muttering something about blatant racism. Izuku opened his phone and began scrolling. He was sure Noboru knew how to do basic research, but Izuku knew how to dig. So he let Noboru handle the surface information such as stats, ranking, and background, while Izuku searched for primary sources. Interviews with the hero, interviews with people who worked the hero, copies of paperwork found on company websites, public opinion per region, records of his hero office's public involvement. Easy stuff. But Noboru wasn't doing basic research. "Hey Midoriya, I've hacked into Native's hero agency's financial database," he said, way too casually for the impact of that statement. Izuku almost dropped his phone. "You what?" Noboru turned the laptop around so Izuku could see the screen. What appeared to be tens of files were being downloaded onto the laptop at various speeds. "I thought it might be helpful," he said, shrugging. "And, what kind of information is this, exactly?" Izuku asked, voice small. "It's mostly financial records. I bet there's something sketchy going on with money passing through all sorts of wrong hands and landing in the big man's overstuffed pockets." Noboru turned the laptop back to him and began to open documents that have been downloaded. "You should read these, since you can probably decipher them better than me." Izuku crawled over until he was right next to his friend, who shifted the laptop into his lap. "How? Is this safe?" "Oh, totally. I covered all my tracks, and it isn't like this information is heavily secured. Just had to find the IP address of a lower-level employee's work computer, since they're more likely to not have a firewall installed, and bam. I have access to the entire network." Izuku was gaping, mouth hanging open as he read through these very illegal documents. "That's absolutely insane, Noboru. Why do you even need to know how to do this?" Noboru winked. "We all have secrets," was all he said. Izuku knew he wouldn't get any more out of him, not now, so he just focused on the screen in front of him. Izuku wasn't sure he would find anything useful. Native himself was a bad hero, but that didn't mean his office was doing illegal business. He shouldn't have been doubtful, however. By the time Izuku had gone through all 27 financial documents spanning the last 10 years, he was exhausted. After shifting through pages upon pages of donations, wages, subsidies, taxes, repairs, events, and merchandise, he knew exactly where money started and ended in 𝐻𝐻𝐻's agency. They have been underpaying their workers, cutting corners on property damage repairs, and lying about charity donations on their tax forms for years. But that last part is going to be strong to prove without exact copies of 𝐻𝐻's tax forms. And no, we're not going to hack that, because I don't feel like going to prison. Plus, with all the information I found about his history of drag abuse and the full impact of his racism, we have more than enough to end his career. 𝐻𝐻𝐬 could feel himself growing giddy. He immediately opened a search engine and typed out his forum website, logging in and clicking New Post. Then he hesitated. Logged out. Clicked Sign Up and passed the laptop back to Noboru. What's this? Noboru asked. 𝐻𝐻𝐬 shifted awkwardly. I was thinking that you should probably be the one making the post. The faults of these heroes have affected you more than me because I only just moved here, so I haven't really experienced yet how their negligence and greed impacts places like this. He looked up, and green eyes met brown. But you do. Together we have all the factual information, but you can make it personal. Noboru seemed to consider it. Then he reached up and ruffled 𝐻𝐻𝐬's green curls, causing him to splutter and playfully swat his hand away. Sorry, Noboru said, a smirk creeping up on his face. I've wanted to do that since you first walked into the classroom. The smile remained as he began to make an account, being sure to use a self-destructible email to avoid tracing and backlash. What should the username be? 𝐻𝐻𝐬 put a finger on his lip. Something simple but noticeable, that people will recognize and relate to. A mask that will symbolize us. He thought for a second, and then the answer became crystal clear. I've got it. Noboru entered the username and password, saying, I'm still going to need your help, though. I've never received a passing grade on any of my essays, ever. 𝐻𝐻𝐬 couldn't help it. He laughed, loud and boisterous, and shot Noboru a grin so wide it lightened up the room without the use of any quirk. You got it. At 6:40 p.m. on Tuesday, forum user 𝐀𝐦 posted a 7,000-word analysis detailing the many sins of pro-hero 𝐻𝐻 and his agency. After popular forum user 𝐀𝐦 shared the work on his own account, the essay gathered attention. In 24 hours the post was shared 2,000 times with over 400 comments. It was reposted onto other websites until thousands of people had read or at least heard about it, and in 3 days the press was outside 𝐻𝐻's office door, asking for him to comment, demanding to see the evidence shared online. 𝐻𝐻's national rank dropped dramatically from the mid-200s to the low 800s. Other heroes came to his defense, but they too were attacked until they dropped the subject. The commission was battered repeatedly until they had no choice but to take away 𝐻𝐻's license. He had barely avoided arrest, but since 𝐀𝐦 couldn't provide evidence of lying on the tax forms, nothing came of that accusation. Over the weekend, 𝐻𝐻𝐬 texted an article about the hero's unemployment to Noboru. Me look. We actually did it attachment, link, 12:22 p.m., Noboru Akio dude hell yeah reforming the hero industry, one piece of SHT at a time, 12:24 p.m., me it says that the agency is going to dissolve, and all the funds that can no longer be used are going to be donated to charity, 12:24 p.m., Noboru Akio now they're finally donating 𝐻𝐻BTW. Someone wants to meet you, 12:25 p.m., me. Who? 12:25 p.m., Noboru Akio just come over later unless you're still in trouble for last time. 12:26 p.m., me I'm not I told my mom we were doing a research project and she let it go, 12:26 p.m., Noboru Akio sweet. You didn't even lie, kinda see you, 12:27 p.m., 2 hours later found 𝐻𝐻𝐬 knocking on Noboru's door. It was Sunday, so his mom was finally starting her first job as a secretary closer to the area in which they used to live, leaving 𝐻𝐻𝐬 to his own devices. When she got the call last Friday saying that she was hired, both Midoriyas were ecstatic. 𝐀𝐦 would work 5 days a week, Sunday through Thursday, from 11 a.m. to 7 p.m. The stability of such a schedule had been an utter relief, as they knew they needed plenty of time to get back on their feet. The door swung open, but not to reveal Noboru. Instead, standing in the doorway glaring down at him was an incredibly tall, buff, bald man with eyes the color of sulfur. His face was pulled into a deep scowl, like Izuku had somehow personally offended him by being there. Izuku said, feeling very small, wrong door. It's the right door. Noboru's voice called from inside the apartment. Brimstone, let him in, would you? And quit intimidating the poor guy. The human rock strangely called Brimstone stepped back silently and allowed Izuku to enter. Izuku skittered past, careful not to make eye contact, and saw Noboru sitting on his couch. Television paused. A lanky woman with a bright blue mohawk was in the kitchen cooking something. She turned around when Izuku stood awkwardly near the living room near the other boy, shooting a friendly smile his way. Her face was similar to Noboru's, now that he could see it. They had the same long nose and angular jawline, and her birthmark was below her right eye. You must be Akio's new friend, the woman said, waving a knife in the air precariously. Izuku bowed. I'm Midoriya Izuku. It's a pleasure to meet you. The woman bowed back. I'm Noboru Kazuyo, Akio's big sister. Were you the one who wanted to meet me? Izuku asked, shifting his weight. That would be me, a deep voice said behind Izuku, making him jump. He whipped around to come face to face with Brimstone. Or, rather, face to abs. Oh. Izuku bowed again. Pleased to meet you as well, Brimstone-san. Brimstone snorted and moved to sit down next to Noboru, who was looking at Izuku like he was a comedy special. Izuku glared at his friend and took a seat in a wooden chair beside the couch so he could face everyone at once. What did you want to talk about? Izuku asked. He was growing increasingly uncomfortable the longer he sat there with 3 pairs of eyes trained on him. It was Kazuyo who broke the silence. She put the lid over a pot of whatever it was she was making, then leaned on the low counter. Brimstone is my fiancé, she said. Izuku tried very strong not to react. He runs a community organization dedicated to supporting underprivileged families in this side of town. It's called Blue Circle and made up mostly of volunteers. I'm a member, and it's a lot of fun, Noboru added. We do a lot of fundraisers in the richer parts of the city and you can sign up to do things like helping at the food pantry. Sometimes you can even make money by working commissions. The teachers love when we do community service, too. Okay. Izuku said. Were they going to ask him to join? He would, in all honesty, just to spend more time with Noboru. But he could sense there was more. The 3 exchanged looks. Then Brimstone cleared his throat and said in his baritone, you helped Akio out with that Kitsune 2 post, right? Izuku's back straightened as he shot a glare at Noboru. We weren't supposed to tell anybody. It's okay, dude, Noboru said, putting his hands up in surrender. I promise. Izuku tried to relax but found he couldn't. What they had done was incriminating if the wrong people found out. His heart was beating so loudly in his chest he almost didn't hear Brimstone's next words. As a group, Blue Circle isn't too fond of heroes. I wanted to thank you for what you did, Brimstone said. His strong eyes softened, and Izuku realized that the man's face was rather handsome when he didn't look 2 degrees away from murder. He calmed down, relaxing back in his seat. Oh. You're welcome, I guess, Izuku replied. Native has been kinda a pain in the butt, Kazuyo said. Everyone knew his agency was fudging numbers, pocketing yen. He kept saying over and over that he was donating to organizations like ours, but we never saw a dime. He wasn't the only one either. So, yeah, nice going, kid. She smiled at him, and Izuku politely smiled back. One last thing before I ask if you want to join Blue Circle, Brimstone said, confirming Izuku's suspicion. There's a hidden part to our group that not many know about. It's a way for people to let off some steam and use their quirks where the police can't see. You can even earn some cash, but only if you're very lucky or very smart. Akio told us that you have an analysis quirk, so I thought it might be good practice for you. At this, Kazuyo huffed and turned around, tending to her pot. Brimstone winced at his fiancée's reaction. She didn't want me to bring this up. It's Midoriya's choice. He doesn't have to come if he doesn't want to. Noboru defended. I don't even like that you go, Akio, Kazuyo said, stirring angrily. You're both way too young to be involved in this sort of thing. I'm not involved, I just like to watch. You'll get involved if Midoriya tags along. What is it, exactly? Izuku said, interrupting the argument before it got too far. Brimstone seemed tired. It's a fight club, all three said at the same time. There was silence as Izuku processed. A fight club? Like, an illegal fight club, he asked. Noboru rolled his eyes. Dude, duh. Don't make that face. You crossed that line the second we made the Kitsune 2 account. What do you say? Brimstone said, leaning forward on his knees. You don't need to ever come to the fight club if you don't want to, like Akio said. I only wanted to let you know about it. Izuku touched his lip and thought. Attending the fight club seemed like an unnecessary risk, but Noboru looked excited about it. Plus, it would be fun to analyze people's quirks and try to figure out who was going to win. But what if something happened, and they got caught? Their futures would be ruined, and Izuku would never get into UA. Although, Brimstone seemed confident in his organization. He must have been running it for a long time, possibly as a front, but more likely because he genuinely cared about his community. It would probably be full of people just like the ones sitting in front of him, kind, active people who knew what was right and wrong. And if only Blue Circle members could join the fight club, then he was sure there would be good people there too. Also there was chance Izuku could make some money, apparently. He wasn't sure how that worked, but if it was something he was able to do. 3 million yen. I'll join, Izuku said, unknowingly interrupting his own mumbling. And I'll come check out the fight club, too. Kazuyo groaned in defeat as Noboru cheered and Brimstone sat back, breathing out heavily. Glad to have you on board. Akio will take you to our location this Friday, the large man said. Izuku grinned. I'll see you there. Inko was having a strong time finding a second job. The first came as a blessing, quick and reliable. It paid enough to keep a roof over their heads and food on the table, but it wasn't enough to cover the monthly installments Inko owed to the bank. They began to cut corners even more than usual. Dirty laundry would have to be reworn, clean clothes hung up to dry. Gray water was used to flush toilets. Inko made milk out of evaporated milk powder and water instead of buying jugs, and she bought yeast to teach Izuku how to bake his own bread instead of buying loaves. Inko found someone to carpool to work with, the weekly gas money cheaper than bus fare. Izuku could see how strong it was on his mom. She no longer had time to housekeep, picking up extra hours whenever she could. Izuku made sure to vacuum every day after school, cook dinner and do the dishes, clean the kitchen and bathroom. He was doing what was necessary to upkeep the house, even though it was all the chores his mother enjoyed doing. But she had to work, and Izuku's only job was school. School and co-running the Kitsune 2 account, that is. The next pro he and Noboru had zeroed in on was a low-ranking hero called Kamikaze. He had a quirk that allowed him to teleport short distances, and his favorite pastimes were spending time with his family, patrolling the city during the evenings, and bribing police officers when he inevitably got caught harassing the homeless. Kamikaze's story gained even more attention than Native's, not because it was more interesting or shocking, but because a second post by Kitsune 2 meant that whoever was running the account had more to say. This time, Kamikaze tried to sue Kitsune 2 for defamation, but the case went up in smoke. You can't sue someone who knows how to remain anonymous. The press went crazy, Kamikaze was stripped of his license, and that was that. On Wednesday, Noboru sat down on a wooden park bench during their walk home from school, patting the seat next to him so Izuku could sit down too. The park was more like an empty lot populated only by squirrels. The grass was turning brown with the gradual depletion of sunlight, and there were no families around. They had complete privacy here. Do you think we're doing the right thing? Noboru asked after a moment of silence. Izuku glanced at his friend. The indigo-haired boy had a stony expression on his face. Yeah, of course, Izuku said. But didn't you want to be a hero? Izuku nodded. Yeah. I really do. But I want to be a good hero. One who doesn't turn a blind eye to the wrongdoings of the hero industry. Good. Not just great. Noboru's expression didn't change. I don't care about getting caught, he admitted. I mean, I don't care if I get caught. You, though, you have your mom and a bright future. You could amend the hero industry from the inside once you're actually in it. You know you don't need to be risking all of that just to make some stupid forum posts with me, right? Izuku gaped at Noboru for a second. Did he think that Izuku didn't already know this? Did he forget the whole account was Izuku's idea in the first place? Then, he couldn't help it, he asked, Noboru, do you think I can be a hero? The other boy seemed confused at the subject change. Of course you can. Why? Noboru frowned. Midoriya, I don't understand just answer. Please. Noboru looked back out over the field, considering. You're really smart. You're shy, but you care. About people. You have a drive in you to always do the right thing, even when it's not what other people are doing. Even when it's illegal. Izuku clenched his hands into fists on the bench. And? What about my quirk? Noboru shrugged. Analysis is useful, but the quirk doesn't make the hero. So anyone can be a hero, no matter how weak the quirk. Yeah. I suppose. As long as you want to save people, you can figure out how to use your quirk for good. Now was time for the question Izuku was leading up to. He tried to steady his breathing before he asked, do you think a quirkless person can become a hero, too? Silence. The only sound was the rise and fall of the buzzing cicadas around them. A car passed by on the street behind the park. It came and went, and even when the sound of the engine tapered off into the distance, there was still no answer. Izuku spared a glance to Noboru and saw the same stone-faced expression he was wearing earlier, the one that Izuku could never read. Anxiety was bubbling in his stomach, growing with each second Noboru was silent. Just when he was about to take it back, change the subject, Noboru inhaled sharply and turned his body on the bench so that he was fully facing Izuku. Sorry, he said, and smiled so that Izuku's fears would melt away. It took me a minute to come up with an answer to that. No one has ever asked me that, you see. A quirkless hero. Unthinkable. Izuku's heart sank. He didn't know what he was expecting. But Noboru wasn't done. Booty think that it's possible. Izuku's head lifted in surprise, eyes wide. Noboru's grin stretched. I don't see why a person with a weak quirk can be a hero candidate, but a quirkless person can't. Izuku had to try very strong not to burst into tears right at that moment. No one had ever said that to him, ever. It was like a weight lifted from his shoulders and dissipated. His entire life, no one believed a quirkless person could be a hero. Quirkless lives were supposed to be nothing more than denied applications and eating lunch alone. They were to get entry-level jobs and never be able to move up, never marry or have kids, basically exist only to aspire for a life that was never meant for them. Being born quirkless in this generation was a social death sentence. But Noboru believed in him. Even if he didn't know the truth, Noboru believed he could be a hero. He wiped his eyes with his arm and said, "That's why I'm doing this with you, Noboru. You're strong. You're willing to see society in a different way than most people do, and do something about the wrongs you witness. Together, you and I can make a real difference." He gave a watery smile at Noboru, who was staring at him now with stars in his eyes. "I don't want to get caught, and I hope we never do, but I trust you." Noboru barked out a laugh, and the air passed through Izuku's lungs easier. "You trust the guy who is about to bring you to a dangerous illegal fight club in a couple of days?" Izuku nodded. "Yup." Noboru laughed again, something like relief clouding the sound. "I was worried that you didn't think this through. I thought if I talked to you, you would see how stupid you're being and decide you don't want to be my friend," he said. "Me? Not want to be friends with Noboru Akio? the most popular guy in class. Izuku bumped Noboru's shoulder lightly with his own. Like that would ever happen. Noboru chuckled. For another few minutes, neither boy talked. They took the time to bask in the other's company, the fresh air, the cicadas. Eventually, Noboru stood up. The sunset basked him a pink glow that softened his face as he held a hand out to Izuku. Come on, let's go, Midoriya. Izuku grabbed his wrist and pulled himself up. Izuku. Noboru tilted his head, still holding on to him. What? Call me Izuku. Another second, and then Noboru broke out into a wide, bright smile that squinted his eyes and washed away any remaining doubts in Izuku's chest. Call me Akio, then. Friday evening found Izuku and Akio standing in front of a weathered brick building, their long shadows stretching beside them. The building was 5 stories tall with a slanted roof and large rectangular windows covering most of the front. Blinds obstructed the view into every window, and all were dark. The front doors were unlocked when Akio tried the handle. They both slipped inside. Somehow Izuku wasn't expecting the Blue Circle headquarters to look so average. A receptionist's desk sat at the end of the empty lobby, and the right wall opened up to a waiting room, also empty. Behind the desk were hallways lined with doors that led to offices, Izuku was sure, and a closed elevator was on the wall to their left. The walls were plaster and painted sky blue, with colorful paintings mounted sparingly. Every other surface was clean wood or tile, nothing ornate. The lights were fluorescent and seemed newly installed, casting the entire place in a pleasant bright light. The air smelled faintly like someone's vanilla-scented air freshener. This is nice, Izuku commented. He felt slightly uneasy being here, anxious for what was about to happen but comforted by Akio's presence. The other boy wasn't dressed in his usual casual clothing. Instead, he was wearing a gym shorts and a black athletic tank top, as well as a black surgical mask covering the lower half of his face. His hair was tied into a high, tight ponytail, showing off his birthmark. Izuku felt like he was dressed wrong, still in his t-shirt and jeans. Brimstone is really proud of this place, Akio said. He always keeps it in perfect condition. He gestured for Izuku to follow, then walked past the receptionist's desk and into one of the hallways. Their footsteps echoed in the large space. Izuku knew that the building was empty of people because it was after closing time. He was still off-put by the silence. Akio led him past several closed doors, a cafeteria, and a lounge area, until they reached an elevator in the back of the building. The up button glowed green when he pressed it. Why didn't we use the elevator in the lobby? Izuku asked, stepping into the box with Akio once the door opened. This is why, Akio said, pointing to the panel. There were the regular buttons for open doors, closed doors, emergency, and the 4 floors above ground level. There was also a button below all the others, labeled 0. Akio pressed that one and the elevator started moving down, startling Izuku. He couldn't see Akio's mouth, but his eyes squinted, giving Izuku the impression that he was smirking. This is the only elevator in the building with access to the basement. And the basement is where the fight club is. Izuku said, to which Akio nodded. The ride down was longer than expected, but perhaps that wasn't so surprising. Izuku became more nervous as the seconds passed. He shifted from foot to foot and fidgeted with his fingers in the silence. What kind of people were going to be there? Would they be mean, crude types of people who only cared about winning? Izuku has had enough of that kind of person in his life. Would he stand out? Should he have worn a mask, like Akio? Was that a thing? He glanced over and saw the other boy watching him. Izuku froze, removing his hand from his chin, which he didn't even realize he put there. What? The mask is because quirk use is forbidden outside of the ring, and sunny disposition doesn't work if you can't see me smile. Izuku blinked, and Akio tilted his head. Although, a lot of people do wear masks for the effect, not that it provides any anonymity because most people here know each other. Ah! He had said all that out loud. If quirk use isn't allowed outside of the ring, does that mean I can't use analysis to predict fights? 𝐀𝐦 put his hand on Izuku's shoulder as the doors dinged open. "I think you'll be okay," he said, and walked out. Izuku thought he was used to crowded places. He had been to malls, subways, intersections, merch sales, hero cons. He grew up in a downtown area. But even in the most chaotic of groups, there was always a certain kind of order that could be found, as people respect others' needs for boundaries and privacy. The Blue Circle Fight Club caught Izuku completely off guard. The basement itself was huge. It felt agoraphobic and claustrophobic at the same time, 3/4 of a kilometer square, a ceiling 12 meters high, concrete walls and floor, and packed with cheering, yelling, shoving bodies. Every 100 meters, a fighting ring was established by a slightly raised platform surrounded by a square wall of rope. Onlookers crowded the 7 total rings. Some were shouting encouragements, some were silently attentive, some were taking and placing bets. As he followed 𝐀𝐦 to the back of the room, Izuku focused on one woman who was handing a bundle of cash over to a bookie. The young man checked the money, then wrote her name and the amount down on a sheet of paper he was carrying. The fight they were passing ended only seconds after it began, with someone flying out of the ring and landing in a heap on the ground meters away. The crowd broke out in exclamations and applause, so cacophonous that Izuku had to resist the urge to cover his ears, and the bookie leapt into the ring to distribute winnings. That's what Brimstone meant about making some money, Izuku thought. He felt something like hope rise within him. If he was allowed to make bets, he for sure would be able to make an earning. He could do it. Analyzing fights and quirks was his main hobby. But the look on 𝐀𝐦's face when Izuku turned to him stopped him short. The other boy's eyes were slightly squinted in pity, and he was rubbing his neck. "Sorry," he said. "It'll be a while until you're able to do that." "Do what?" "Place bets." Izuku flushed. "How did you know that I wanted to dash?" "Izuku, no offense, but you're as easy to read as a picture book," 𝐀𝐦 said, causing Izuku's cheeks to redden deeper. "Now hurry up, Kazuyo is waiting for us." Together they shouldered past adults heads taller than them, some with obvious mutations, some with more inconspicuous quirks, but all rearing for a good fight. Some people glanced at Izuku curiously, but once they saw 𝐀𝐦 walking beside him turned their attention away. They seemed to be used to his presence here despite him being a child. At the back of the room they found Kazuyo watching 2 men duke it out in the 7th ring. She spotted the boys and waved them over. 𝐀𝐦 stopped a few feet away from his sister, so Izuku stopped right beside him. He watched with bemusement as the siblings stared at each other, Kazuyo glaring down at him while he stared stubbornly right back at her. Finally, Kazuyo spoke up. "Why are you dressed in your athletic clothes?" 𝐀𝐦 raised his chin defiantly and threw an arm around Izuku's shoulder. "We want to fight." Izuku's yelp of surprise went ignored. "Absolutely not." "Why not?" 𝐀𝐦 challenged. Kazuyo leveled a glare at her brother. "We are not having this argument again, young man. You are 12 years old and inexperienced. You are not going up against these crazy people. How are we going to get experience if you don't let us fight?" Izuku decided now would be a good time to cut in. "For the record, there is no we," he said, shrugging off his friend's arm. "Yes there is," 𝐀𝐦 insisted. "There really isn't." Kazuyo crossed her arms, only more infuriated. "You are going to force Midoriya to fight." "He wants to." "I do not." 𝐀𝐦 put his hands on his hips. "Kazuyo, tell him the rule." "Which one?" "There's a few," Kazuyo said, eyebrows scrunching in confusion. "The one about the bets." Kazuyo looked between the boys before realization fell over her expression, then she reached up to pinch her nose before muttering, "You aren't allowed to place any bets until you win one time in the ring." There was a beat of silence. Then Izuku threw his arm around 𝐀𝐦's shoulder in a mimic of their earlier pose. "We want to fight," he said. "I can't believe this," Kazuyo said into her hand. "Still." "No." "Izuku," 𝐀𝐦 said. "Do the thing." "The thing." 𝐀𝐦 had caught him doing it at his mom once when asking to go to the store, even though it was almost dark out. 𝐬𝐻𝐬 tried to only use it when he really wanted something. With great power comes great responsibility, and all that. So he widened his already large eyes, willed them to wet, stuck his bottom lip out ever so slightly, and did his best to look adorable. 𝐀𝐦 kept her face strong as stone. A second passed. 10. 𝐀𝐦's lip twitched, 𝐬𝐻𝐬 pouted his lip out farther. 20 seconds. A single tear cascaded beautifully down 𝐬𝐻𝐬's cheek. 𝐀𝐦 cracked and she threw her hands in the air. Holy 𝐓𝐡, fine. Each of you gets to fight once, and I get to choose who you're going up against, she relented, looking extremely angry at herself. 𝐬𝐻𝐬 and 𝐴𝐾𝐲 cheered and high-fived with a loud smack. 𝐬𝐻𝐬 hadn't expected to go in the ring today, he only wanted to watch and learn. But he needed money, and if the only way to get it was to win, well, might as well start working towards it. Besides, it would be a good experience to actually fight back against someone who was trying their hardest to turn him into a black and blue meat sack. The fight behind them ended with a stone fist connecting to some poor guy's jaw, knocking him out. The crowd went wild and 𝐀𝐦 rolled her eyes. Yen were handed around, but nothing went to her. You don't bet? 𝐬𝐻𝐬 asked her. 𝐀𝐦 doesn't like to take risks, especially with money, 𝐴𝐾𝐲 explained. She actually hates this part of Blue Circle. She only comes here to supervise when Brimstone isn't able to. 𝐬𝐻𝐬 nodded in understanding. 𝐀𝐦 and 𝐴𝐾𝐲 seemed similar in some ways and total opposites in others. They were both stubborn, caring, and advocated for the same causes. But 𝐴𝐾𝐲 was elusive and sneaky, an expert at masking his emotions when he wanted to. 𝐬𝐻𝐬 didn't know 𝐀𝐽 well yet, but he could tell that where 𝐴𝐾𝐲 was black ice, she was glaciers. She wore her heart on her sleeve, a force to be reckoned with. She was no match for 𝐬𝐻𝐬's puppy eyes, though. 𝐀𝐽 led the boys back towards the front of the room near the elevator. Inexperienced fighters start in the first ring, she said as she cleared a path through the crowd. People parted for her as if she were royalty and closed off behind them. As you win more and more, you get to move up. The 7th ring is where the best fighters brawl. Lots of money circulates there. 𝐬𝐻𝐬 swiveled his head around to look back at the 7th ring, but he was too short to see over the sea of people. He imagined himself standing there one day, all ripped muscles and victorious grins, one foot on his defeated opponent and throwing his fist in the air triumphantly. With a wave of his hand, he quickly dismissed the thought. That would never happen. The three reached the first ring and shoved their way to the front of the crowd. Watch for now, 𝐀𝐦 commanded. On the elevated platform, one person with an owl mutation was pecking at a woman who was breathing a white mist at her opponent. The owl person's strategy was to run up and peck her wherever they could before she could blow on him, probably trying to weaken and exhaust her, but 𝐬𝐻𝐬 could tell that the strategy was flawed. The owl person missed more times than they hit, so they were only exhausting themselves. Plus, they couldn't fully dodge the woman's breath, which seemed to burn the owl person whenever they came in contact. That lady's steam breath is tricky, a man with glowing hair said to the person next to him. Steam breath? 𝐬𝐻𝐬 asked before he could stop himself. The man turned around, gave him a once-over, then grunted. Yeah, that's what her quirk is, he said. See how the other person keeps flinching away. It's extremely hot. 𝐬𝐻𝐬 watched the fight more closely. The woman with steam breath was now advancing on the owl person. As she moved closer, the owl feathers puffed up. A natural response to a threat. Or, oh. 𝐬𝐻𝐬 knew what was going on. He itched for his notebook, but not knowing if note-taking was allowed, he hadn't brought it. Noboru-san, 𝐬𝐻𝐬 turned to the woman. What are all the rules for Blue Circle Fight Club? Let's see, 𝐀𝐦 said, putting a hand on her hip. 1. The club is invite only, and the only people allowed to hand out invites are Brimstone and myself. 2. Once you're in, Brimstone and I have to know your quirk for safety reasons. You don't need to tell anyone else. 3. Participation is optional. You can throw down the gauntlet, but no one has to pick it up. 4. Quirk use is only allowed inside the ring. Unless it's one you can't turn off, like yours, but we have to know that. 5. Non-offensive quirk users may use an approved weapon that isn't ballistic. And the last rule is the one about bets. I see. So it's normal for people to lie about their quirks? Izuku asked. Oh yeah, Akio said. Deception is the best way to defend yourself. Okay, Izuku said. Because that woman doesn't have a steam quirk. The glow-hair man gave him an incredulous look. What do you mean, kid? There's no way she's lying about what's obviously steam coming out of her mouth. Izuku turned his full attention to the man. Have you ever fought her, sir? Yes, and I can tell you, being hit with her steam burns like nothing else, he said. And is it often humid standing next to her? Do you find her drinking a lot of water before a fight? Izuku pressed. The man's eyes narrowed. I bet you haven't. Because she's not breathing superheated water vapor. What is it then? The man said, voice too blunt and low to be a question. He wasn't taking Izuku seriously. That was fine. He didn't care about the opinion of a stranger. She's breathing sublimated carbon dioxide. Dry ice, Izuku stated. He glanced back towards the fight and saw the owl person succumb to enough burns to forfeit the fight. A medic rushed onto the stage to carry them away. Either the medic was very strong or the owl person had hollow bones, and then the bookie was back, calling out names and numbers. The dry ice breath woman was walking back into the crowd, being pat on the back and congratulated for her victory. The glow-haired man didn't take his eyes off Izuku. How did you figure that out? He asked, voice barely above a murmur. It's his quirk. Akio chimed in. Analysis. Isn't it cool? Analysis, huh? Alright kid, we both have non-offensive quirks. Why don't you and I give it a go, the man said. Izuku blinked at him. Huh? Akio elbowed Izuku in the side. Dude. This is perfect. Fight him and win, and you can start to place bets. Izuku turned toward Kazuyo, who was giving the glow-hair man a glare. Do I have your permission, Noboru-san? Kazuyo looked between Izuku and the glow-hair man, arms crossed, before she finally bowed her head and sighed. Sure, Midoriya. At least I know Minato-san here won't maim you. She craned her head to look around, before gesturing for Izuku to follow. He kept close behind her as she led the way to a person with skin that sparkled, as if an unsupervised 5-year-old with glue and a bottle of glitter got to them. They were carrying a bow staff in their hand. Hey, Takahashi-san, Kazuyo said, getting their attention. This is Midoriya. Can he borrow your staff for the next fight? Izuku bowed. Takahashi grinned, and Izuku saw that their teeth were translucent like quartz. Emichim. Here you go, Midoriya-kun. Break a leg. They passed over their staff. Izuku grasped it awkwardly in his hands. It was almost as long as he was tall, extending his reach by a significant margin that he didn't quite know what to do with. Thank you, Takahashi-san. But, if it's alright, I'd rather not break my leg tonight. Takahashi chuckled and thumped Izuku on the back. Atta boy. Break your opponent's legs, then. Seriously, go for the legs. And stomach. And if you manage to get them doubled over, a nice hit to the jaw should do it. They thumped his back again, and then Izuku was lifted under the armpits onto the platform like a puppy. As he stood there, looking down at the sea of people with all eyes on him, he felt pretty good. Noticed. And incredibly nervous all of a sudden. Then Minato pushed himself into the ring, and a tense anticipation fell over the crowd. He was carrying his own weapon, a steel double-edged sword. Silently, Minato took out an Oni mask, red, frowning, and slowly placed it over his face. The glow of the other man's hair pulsed a steady rhythm, similar to a heartbeat. He looked like a demon right out of hell. It was mesmerizing. Izuku shook his head to clear it. He needed to focus on his opponent. He would bet he was the youngest person to fight at Blue Circle. He didn't expect to win, but he was going to try his hardest. Minato made the first move. He lunged for 𝐬𝐻𝐸 𝐸 his sword in a quick downwards motion. 𝐬𝐻𝐸 just barely blocked in time by holding his bow staff above his head. The weapon struck with a resounding clang, and the audience cheered. Minato stepped forward and swung low, but 𝐬𝐻𝐸 hopped back. The sword came flashing towards him and he parried it away, pivoting his foot to try to keep light on his feet. And on it went, Minato striking and 𝐬𝐻𝐸 dodging or clumsily blocking. 𝐬𝐻𝐸 had never fought back against Katsuki and the other bullies before. Defending himself only ever made things worse. But he did learn how to run, be swift and agile, roll into a fall, jump high over fences, sense danger before he even saw their shadows. Now, he was finally able to use those instincts to good use. Minato could barely get a hit on him. Sometimes 𝐬𝐻𝐸 wasn't quick enough, and he would earn a strong bruise, only motivating him to move even faster. It was a relief to find that Minato's sword had a blunt edge. Bleeding cuts were always harder to explain away than bruises. However, 𝐬𝐻𝐸 couldn't keep going on like this forever. He was exhausting fast from running and skipping around the ring, knowing at least that he shouldn't stay in one spot too long. What he needed to do was go on the offensive, land a blow on Minato, strong and fast like was done to him. He needed to find out how to end it, how to win. The only problem was, despite all his research on hero fights, despite the advice Takahashi gave him, Minato left no openings. Minato's attacks were relentless and the Oni mask made him seem like a devil capable of ruthless pain. Standing on a raised platform in the middle of an illegal fight club with 100 people watching him dance around like a fool, 𝐬𝐻𝐸 felt properly frightened. The blade struck him in the shoulder and pain shot down his arm. He bit back a scream, letting himself go limp so he could fall, land on the opposite shoulder, and roll into a crouch behind Minato. The man hadn't expected that move, still facing forward where he thought 𝐬𝐻𝐸 would be cowering. Now! 𝐬𝐻𝐸 swung out with the bow staff to the back of Minato's knees, and the man shouted and fell into a kneel. 𝐬𝐻𝐸 jumped up and ran back around, 𝗧𝗵𝗭𝐺𝐺 for his stomach. Minato's sword blocked the staff so harshly that 𝐬𝐻𝐸's grip loosened and the staff went flying out of his hands back into the crowd. 𝐬𝐻𝐸 followed it with his eyes, which was a mistake. By the time he faced Minato, the devil was 𝗧𝗵𝗭𝐺𝐺 his sword again. The blunt edge hit 𝐬𝐻𝐸 on his temple, and he was out like a light. 𝐬𝐻𝐸 woke up feeling like his brain was trying to escape his skull. He groaned and sat up, starting to bring a hand up to hold his head, but in a sharp breath when his shoulder burst in an explosion of pain. "Ow, ow, ow, ow," he muttered, and finally opened his eyes. He was in a room that was not the fight ring, small and rectangular with dim blue lighting. The cot he was suddenly sitting in was soft beneath him. Looking around, he could see 7 other similar cots with people lying in them, mostly asleep, 2 against each wall. In the middle of the room were cheap card tables cluttered with medical supplies and a few plastic chairs. There were 3 chairs near 𝐬𝐻𝐸's cot, actually, seating 3 people he immediately recognized. "Midoriya!" Kazuyo shouted, "Lay back down." 𝐬𝐻𝐸 did, looking at Akio in the next chair, still wearing the surgical mask, and Minato, who was wearing an unreadable expression. "Minato-san," 𝐬𝐻𝐸 said. The man glanced up, meeting his eyes. He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again to say, "I'm glad you're okay, Midoriya-kun. I went too far. I was worried about you, so Noboru-san and Akio-kun let me wait for you to wake up so I could apologize." 𝐬𝐻𝐸's eyes widened. He started to shake his head furiously, but stopped at the spike of pain shooting through his cranium. "Don't apologize, Minato-san. That was an incredible fight, thank you for teaching me so much." Minato's eyebrows scrunched in confusion. "Teaching you?" "Yes, sir." Akio snorted, finally relaxing back in his seat. "Of course that would be the first thing you say after waking up in the infirmary, you weirdo." The blue lights turned his indigo hair into a deep cerulean, making him look otherworldly. Oh, he was in the Blue Circle Infirmary. That made sense. 𝐬𝐻𝐸 smiled up at his friend, then a thought came to him. "How long was I out?" "About an hour," Kazuyo snapped. I should have never let you fight. Of course you would get injured. Your arm was dislocated, but we fixed that while you were unconscious, and you have a bump on your forehead the size of a DMN plate. You're not even my kid. Noboru-san, it's okay, Izuku said. I'll be back in fighting condition in no time. Minato and Kazuyo balked, while Akio lifted a thumbs up. That's the spirit, Izuku. Kazuyo shook her head. No. No way. Holy SHT, kid. But I can't get better at fighting if I don't fight, Izuku protested. Akio nodded along, saying, true, very true. You two are going to be the death of me, Kazuyo whined. And that's if Midoriya's mom doesn't get me first. Izuku couldn't help but laugh at that. Oh, don't worry. She won't notice. Although, if I'm not home soon she'll probably get worried, so. He forced himself to sit up again, pushing away the volley of hands trying to help him or push him back down. He placed his feet on the ground, still wearing shoes, and waited for the room to stop spinning. Trying to keep track of everyone's faces when they were circling him like planets was a difficult task. Actually, Noboru-san, can you check me for a concussion? Kazuyo aged 10 years. Akio whipped out his cell phone and made a call. Hello, Midoriya-san. Can Izuku stay over at my place tonight? He said into the receiver. He nodded at Izuku, said thank you. Good night, and then Kazuyo and Minato were helping Izuku stand up. I really am sorry, Minato whispered beside Izuku's ear. Although, I don't think a bow staff is the right weapon for you. Really? Izuku asked as they limped towards the door together. Minato nodded. Your fighting style seems to be based on fast moves and strong hits. With proper training, you could use something like a club. Izuku thought about that. Or, he tried to, but it hurt too much, so he made a mental note to think about it later. During the car ride to the apartments, while resting his head on Akio's shoulder, Izuku realized he never got the chance to see his friend fight. If he even did. Oh, well. Next week Brimstone will be at the fight club, and both of them would be able to take turns getting beat up in front of an audience. He smiled into his best friend's shirt. He couldn't wait. In his own home, Minato sipped his tea and gazed out the dark window. The Midoriya kid looked familiar in an incredibly vague way, as if he were passing a high school classmate on the street. Something about the curly hair and freckles. The determination in his eyes, even when he was concussed and laying in white sheets. He shrugged, finished the tea, and placed the mug in the sink, and decided to call it a day. It was probably nothing. Izuku was trying really strong to pay attention to the teacher. She was lecturing about something math-related, probability, maybe. But Izuku couldn't focus, not when the whole class was passing notes and whispering and shooting glances back at him. Dread started to pool in his gut as he sank in his seat. Was the black eye too obvious? God, they all thought he was a delinquent who got into frequent fights. Well, okay, fair. He and Akio had been going to Blue Circle for 4 weeks every Friday, plus the extra days Izuku snuck in for practice. It was a lot of fun meeting new people who came on different days, sparring against various quirks. Kazuya was very selective on who they could fight, while Brimstone just let whoever wanted to kick a 12-year-old's butt have at it. Most of those people were scrawny adults who needed an easy win in order to cross the threshold. That was fine. He learned from everyone. And there was so much to learn. Akio had been attending the fight club for 2 years, he told Izuku, so over that time he had been receiving bits and pieces of advice that he could put to good use. He showed Izuku the correct way to throw a punch, how to stand to make himself a smaller target, how to kick at full strength and avoid losing balance. From adults like Minato he learned the importance of keeping his eyes on his target, the advantage of moving in close, strategies he knew objectively from watching certain pro-hero fights but never was able to use himself. Izuku could tell he was getting better, little by little, and it wouldn't be long before he won his first match. Watching Akio fight was a privilege. With Izuku's advice, he was able to use his quirk offensively. It was strong to find a way to make sunny disposition useful in a fight, but considering the psychological aspects of a brutal 1v1 in the middle of a hot sweaty basement, they were creative enough to find a couple ways. He could use his quirk to let the opponent off their guard, or he could startle them out of their concentration, or, if there was enough time, he could even set the other person off in a laughing attack, unable to defend themselves. Plus, 𝐀𝐦 was always excellent at reading people. He seemed to know his opponent's next move an instant before they performed it, sweeping through their offense and landing his own. Izuku and 𝐀𝐦 had an unspoken friendly rivalry to see who would win first, but despite Izuku's improvement, 𝐀𝐦's level was higher than his from the start. Hence Izuku's extra practice days, like last night. The only people in the classroom who seemed unconcerned by the state of his eye were 𝐀𝐦 and Fukuhara-sensei. When he saw Izuku's face that morning, 𝐀𝐦 had burst out into laughter so loud that Izuku literally could not be mad at him. That DMN quirk. Let me guess, 𝐀𝐦 had said when he was done wheezing. Was it Inomoto? Izuku sighed. Yes. I knew it. His brass knuckles quirk. 𝐀𝐦 started to lead the way to school, a hoodie on to block out the October morning chill. There's 𝐍𝐸𝐬, Izuku muttered, following behind. 𝐀𝐦 turned around to face his friend, walking backwards down the sidewalk. The day 𝐀𝐦 walked in a normal, straight line was the day he'd die, apparently. His fists aren't brass. They're 𝐍𝐸𝐬𝐬. And you know this because of your quirk. No, but his fists are made of an incredibly reactive element. He wears waterproof, airtight gloves because if his hands come into contact with water, his fingers would explode off. That's why he's missing too. 𝐀𝐦 blanched. Also, when I managed to see them with his gloves off after the fight, I could see deep scratches all over his knuckles. 𝐍𝐸𝐬𝐬 is a soft metal, relatively speaking. And how I know it's not a different element is simply due to the goldish color of his hands. I didn't even know 𝐍𝐸𝐬𝐬 was, like, a thing. You know we don't have to take chemistry until middle school, right? But it's interesting. Biology, chemistry, and physics explain so much about certain quirks if you only understand them, Izuku defended. You're a nerd. Izuku let him walk backwards into a street lamp. Now, in class, Izuku was regretting all of his life choices. He hated attention. Attention meant being a bigger target, and he would love to redirect the gossip train onto a new track, but he wasn't nearly popular enough to do that. 𝐀𝐦 wasn't helping. He just kept glancing over at Izuku, face carefully blank, the way it always was when he was thinking something he didn't want to project. The bell was a blessing. Until Fukuhara-sensei said, "Don't forget to do page 33 for homework tonight. Answers are in the back, but you must show your work for full points. Also, Midoriya-kun. Stay after class, please." The class let out a collective ooh. Izuku wanted to die. He sank all the way down in his seat until he was hiding below his desk, much to the amusement of his classmates, who were all snickering at his suffering. Izuku glanced up at 𝐀𝐦, a plea in his eyes, but the other boy just gave him a sympathetic look as he shrugged on his backpack. "I'll wait for you outside," he said, reaching down to ruffle Izuku's curly hair. Then he left with the rest of the class. Traitors, the lot of them. "Midoriya," Fukuhara-sensei called. "Would you come here?" Izuku wormed his way out of under the desk and trudged his way up to his teacher waiting at her own desk. She was a tiny woman, only about 4 feet tall, but that didn't make her any less imposing. Her wispy gray hair billowed around her head like thunderclouds, and the dangerous electric spark in her eyes was what kept the classroom under control. Despite having a youthful face, Fukuhara-sensei had years of experience under her belt. She was known to WHP the most unruly students into shape. Izuku, standing in front of her desk, felt like he was standing in front of the entrance to a lion's den. "Midoriya," she began in a voice too deep for her stature, "is everything okay at home?" Izuku blinked. He was expecting a reprimand, not that. Yes." Fukuhara-sensei didn't look convinced. "You've been acting out of sorts for the past couple weeks. You're unfocused more often than not." I can see when you're writing in your notebooks that it's not about class content, and now you're coming to school with a black eye. So, I will ask again. Is everything okay at home? We can help, you know. Despite living in this town for a month, surrounded by people who care about and understand each other, 𝐬𝐻𝐬 was still surprised when kindness was directed towards him. Previous teachers never gave a solid SHT when 𝐬𝐻𝐬 was actually going through hell at the hands of Katsuki and other bullies, but now when he was happy for the first time in years, people were concerned. It was a strangely bittersweet feeling, realizing that he would always be misperceived by outsiders. But it was okay, because no one knew the full story. Kitsune too had taken down 2 more false heroes in the past 4 weeks. Whenever his and Akio's scrutinizations resulted in the firing of another fake, the more sure they were that they were doing the right thing. Less pretenders wandering the streets committing underhanded crimes, more spots to be filled by someone worthy of the title of pro-hero. 𝐬𝐻𝐬 felt amazing when scrolling through the comments of encouragement left on their forum posts. Akio's smile of pride was like a beacon to him. This is the way, it said, we're doing something good. So he couldn't help but do his analyses during dull subjects, taking notes on which heroes in the news were daunted by the rise of Kitsune too and planning their investigations. Some things felt more important than modern Japanese literature. However, things weren't perfect. As the days went by, Inko and 𝐬𝐻𝐬 saw each other less and less. She found a second job at a hospital, and now she worked all day as a secretary and all night as a receptionist. Her one day off was Friday, which she spent sleeping. It left a sour taste in his mouth to see his mom working so strong for them both while he could do nothing to help. Not yet, anyway. Things really are fine, Fukuhara-sensei, 𝐬𝐻𝐬 said, making sure he was smiling reassuringly. I'm sorry for being distracted during class. I'll be sure to pay more attention from now on. And your injury? 𝐬𝐻𝐬 forced out an embarrassed chuckle. Noboru-kun and I were playing by the river after school yesterday. We were skipping rocks, and when I went downstream to look for clam shells he accidentally skipped a rock into my face. Everything's sorted out between us, though, so there's no need to worry. Fukuhara looked over his expression for any tells of lying, but 𝐬𝐻𝐬 was well versed in the art of getting out of trouble. He would have been expelled from his last school years ago if he wasn't. Finally, his teacher let out a relieved breath. That's good to hear. I still want to talk to your mother to make sure, she said, taking out a piece of paper from her desk. 𝐬𝐻𝐬 reflexively held out a hand to stop her. There's no need for that. My mom works a lot and is rarely home, so I doubt she would be able to find the time. Your mom is rarely home. CRP. Well. Noboru-kun's family and our other neighbors are really nice and make sure I'm safe and fed and yeah. It's a strong time for us, but we're alright. I'm alright. So, please, there's no need to worry about me, he said, rubbing the back of his neck. Amazingly, Fukuhara relaxed in her chair. Okay, Midoriya-kun. Just know that, if the need ever arises, you can talk to me or any other teacher here. We'll help you in whatever trouble you find yourself in. Alright. She said, slipping the conference request back into her drawer. Yes ma'am, 𝐬𝐻𝐬 said, and then he was dismissed. Friday morning, 𝐬𝐻𝐬 woke up to the sound of the apartment door opening. He blinked blearily, wondering why it was so dark outside, before he remembered. Mom! 𝐬𝐻𝐬 jumped out of his futon and hastily folded his blankets to put aside. Once the futon was folded and leaning against his wall, he slipped on a pair of socks and opened his door. His mom was in the kitchen, bending down to take out a portable grill, still dressed in her scrubs. He rushed into the kitchen and slid on the tile floor with his socks, but the lack of friction had him slamming into the fridge with a yelp. Inko startled and dropped the grill with a clatter that was way too loud for the hour, causing them both to wince and freeze until the shock of the crash faded. Finally, Inko sighed. What are you doing out of bed again, 𝐬𝐻𝐬? School doesn't start for another 4 hours. And then she got a good look at his face. Oh, baby, your eye. What happened? 𝐬𝐻𝐬 reached down to pick up the grill, holding it in both hands like a shield. "I'm making breakfast like always, Mom. Please go and change into more comfortable clothing, and I'll explain over food." 𝐻𝐻𝐬 looked exhausted. Her hair was flying out of her bun in frizzy strands, and there were deep purple circles under her eyes. Her skin was sallow, especially in the dim lighting provided by the one working kitchen lamp, and her hands were trembling just barely. Izuku's heart panged at the sight. "Please," he insisted, and 𝐻𝐻𝐬 sighed again and left to her own room. Izuku listened to hear the shower running before he relaxed against the counter. She was overworked, and they both knew it. The secretary job was extremely busy. Her boss was a major businessman who got frequent calls for meetings and referrals, and 𝐻𝐻𝐬 had to organize them all into a productive yet somehow flexible calendar for her boss to follow while also answering questions, making tea or coffee, and dealing with angry clients. Her hospital job wasn't much better. 𝐻𝐻𝐬 had to check in visitors, answer to stressed-out families, process admissions, print forms, and call doctors. She was given hardly any breaks. Izuku would sometimes see her coming home with the bento he made for her still full. He put the grill back. 𝐻𝐻𝐬 probably wanted to eat grilled fish, but Izuku knew that they used up the last of the fish a week ago. Instead, he took out a saucepan and began to make miso soup. While the stove was heating up, he chopped up some onions to throw into the instant broth packages, added a block of tofu, stirred. As that was cooling on the stove, Izuku turned on the rice maker and made 2 bowls of salad with lettuce and tomatoes, the only ingredients they had. It was a wimpy breakfast, but it tasted good and it was filling. He had learned how to make even store-bought food taste authentic from Kazuyo. One day when Izuku was at the Noborus to work on hero research, Kazuyo had interrupted to announce that she was going to teach them how to prepare food. "Stop breaking the law for an hour and get over here. It's dinner time, and you're cooking. You too, shrimp. Your mom is going to appreciate your meals, but only if you learn from me," she yelled as she marched the boys into the kitchen. Akio looked resigned. "She's been teaching me how to cook for months now," he said. "She would actually be a good teacher if she wasn't so passionate." Kazuyo forced a spatula into Izuku's hand. "I didn't go to culinary school for nothing." "You went to culinary school?" Izuku asked. Kazuyo placed her hands on her hips and stuck her chin up. "That's right, kid. When I dropped out of high school, I had to make a living somehow. I worked as a chef for multiple restaurant chains until I quit to help Brimstone with Blue Circle," Kazuyo explained. That only raised more questions, but before he could ask any of them, Kazuyo yelled, "Now preheat the oven. You're going to gain real-life skills whether you like it or not." Now, Izuku looked forward to putting the unofficial lessons into practice by making breakfast and lunches for his mom. 𝐻𝐻𝐬 liked them too, even though they never tasted as good as her own cooking. He was just setting the table when 𝐻𝐻𝐬 came back into the kitchen, freshly washed and dressed in soft pajamas. She hit him on the head, then went into the living room to pray at Hisashi's shrine. Izuku watched her shoulders drop as she knelt, the way her head was hanging, the stress and the stillness of her back. She hadn't had time to grieve. Izuku's heart sent a pang of something through his body. He didn't have the vocabulary to identify the mess of emotions he was experiencing as he watched his mother stand up and sit down across from him at their tiny dinner table. It was anger, it was loss, it was love, it was determination. In the instant until he looked in his mother's eyes and saw his own green reflected back at him, Izuku became absolutely, unconditionally certain of one thing: that evening, in the fighting ring, he was going to land his first victory. He would pay off his father's debt. "So," 𝐻𝐻𝐬 said, after taking a bite of her soup. "Care to explain?" Izuku cleared his throat. "Right, you see, he was always bad at lying to his mom. There was an accident with Akio-kun, and 𝐻𝐻𝐬 put down her spoon." "What kind of accident?" A stone-skipping accident. He didn't mean to hit me though. I was just being careless," Izuku said, waving his hands assuredly. 𝐻𝐻𝐬 sighed. She only seemed more tired, and Izuku hated himself for adding to her burden. "Alright, baby. You always talk too highly about Noboru-kun, and he does seem like a nice young man. Please be more careful in the future, okay? Izuku swallowed past the lump in his throat. He used to talk highly about Katsuki, too. If Akio was bullying him, would his mom notice? As much as she loved him, she never commented on his other injuries from the fight club. Izuku tried to force a smile. Of course, Mom. How about you tell me about work? Evening came, and under the rise of the full golden moon Izuku and Akio ran through the deserted streets to Blue Circle. They could both sense it in the air, in the of their feet, in the restless energy of the night. Tonight was important. For the first time, both 𝐀𝐦 and Brimstone greeted them as they walked out of the elevator into the basement. It seemed like most of the members were already there, if the sea of faces and loud applause were anything to go by. Lights flashed several different colors and music pumped faintly in the background. The night was already alive. Welcome back, boys, 𝐀𝐦 said. Brimstone simply nodded. Izuku was practically shaking in his sneakers, he was so excited. He opened his mouth to speak. Can I go first? Akio intercepted, voice slightly muffled by his black medical mask. Wait, I want to go first. Izuku said, barely resisting the urge to pout. Early bird gets the worm. Akio asserted. Second mouse gets the cheese. Izuku shot back. Boys, 𝐀𝐦 interjected as the Ring 1 fight behind them ended with an uproar. She exchanged a look with Brimstone, whose lips twitched. We have a solution to this problem. Without ample warning, 𝐀𝐦 stuck her hands underneath Izuku's armpits, ignoring his manly squeak. Brimstone reached out and grabbed Akio's shirt collar like a mother cat holding her kitten by the scruff of his neck. 𝐀𝐦 lifted Izuku, she was strong holy 𝐓𝐡, while Brimstone threw Akio over his shoulder. Then the two adults barreled through the crowd before the money for the last round had even finished distributing. They tossed the boys into the ring as if they weighed nothing, smirking like the devils they were. Izuku landed in a roll, as was instinct by now, and when he stood up to see Akio on the other side of the square, the crowd around them laughing and shoving each other in anticipation and placing bets, he felt the familiar trickle of dread freeze him in place. Hey, everyone! The children are fighting, someone shouted, causing people who were watching Ring 2 to turn their heads. As the commotion grew, so did Izuku's sense of foreboding. Izuku met eyes with Akio from across the platform, who looked just as shocked as Izuku felt. Oh, 𝐓𝐡𝐢. He turned back to 𝐀𝐦 and Brimstone. Can't I get a weapon first? Brimstone was the one who replied. It's just Akio. You know his quirk. You'll be okay. And with his giant hand he gave a thumbs up. It did not make Izuku feel any better. Turning back around, he caught his friend readying himself. He pushed down his mask to expose his mouth, the mundane gesture somehow threatening. I guess this is one way to do it, Akio said. The tension between them could be cut with a butter knife. Izuku shifted into a fighting stance, right leg behind him pointed slightly outwards, fists held near his head, body turned to defend his abdomen. He forced a wobbly grin, trying to appear brave. I guess so. And then Izuku ran forwards. He threw a punch, which Akio dodged. Akio retaliated with a jab to the ribs, momentarily winding Izuku, who tried to use their close quarters to hook his foot behind Akio's ankle and sweep him. But Akio stood firm, using Izuku's unsteady stance to kick backwards and shove Izuku's shoulder forward, and now it was Izuku on the ground with Akio standing above him. 10 seconds and he was already on his back. This was not going well. Izuku couldn't shake the fact that it was his best friend he was sparring, which made this fight somehow more difficult than any other in the past. He could attempt to knock the lights out of any tall, muscular adult who enters the ring with him, but his scrawny friend, his first friend in years. Much harder, emotionally, to punch. Akio took a step forward and Izuku flipped backwards into a low crouch, then swept his ankle out again in a fast horizontal arc. Akio easily sidestepped the attack and kicked Izuku square in the jaw. His head snapped back painfully, then Akio grabbed Izuku's shirt collar and lifted him up while bending down so they were face to face. Get out of your head, Izuku. I'm just like any other opponent. And he threw him onto the strong floor. Of course, 𝐀𝐻𝐬 knew what he was thinking. The back of 𝐬𝐻𝐬's head and jaw were both throbbing, but he couldn't just lay there. For weeks of getting his butt kicked had taught him that. He stumbled to his feet, time granted graciously by 𝐀𝐻𝐬, who was staring him down with wolfish eyes. As soon as 𝐬𝐻𝐬 had his fists up, 𝐀𝐻𝐬 smiled. The familiar bubble of warmth began to form in his chest, but 𝐬𝐻𝐬 looked away instantly and the bubble popped. He couldn't let him use that against him. He needed to be able to focus, not on who he was fighting, but what. This was going to result in a victory that would let him help his mom out of their debt, make their lives easier, give her the time to grieve her husband instead of only working. He sprinted back up to 𝐀𝐻𝐬, who wasn't expecting it this time, and punched him in the nose. As the force caused him to lean back, 𝐬𝐻𝐬 managed to whisper, "Don't forget who showed you how to use your quirk." 𝐀𝐻𝐬's eyes widened in pain and realization as he stumbled back, holding his bleeding nose. The mob of onlookers were rallying, shouting, "Nice punch, 𝐬𝐻𝐬, get his butt, 𝐀𝐻𝐬-kun." It was probably the hypest crowd 𝐬𝐻𝐬 had seen all week. Everyone wanted to know which of the Blue Circle kids would reign victorious over the other. Kazuya was hollering with hands on either side of her mouth, but her voice was drowned out by the rest. 𝐀𝐻𝐬 sprinted forward, hooking with his left arm, which 𝐬𝐻𝐬 blocked with his right forearm. 𝐬𝐻𝐬 used his left fist to try to hit his friend again, but that was blocked and a kick landed on his stomach for his troubles, nauseating him. 𝐬𝐻𝐬 took a step back for some space, then swung his right leg out in a roundhouse kick which landed in 𝐀𝐻𝐬's ribs, causing him to hiss sharply, pain etched all over his bloody face. 𝐬𝐻𝐬's right foot landed and he used the momentum to rotate his body, extend his left leg, and kick 𝐀𝐻𝐬 in the temple with his heel. 𝐀𝐻𝐬 didn't make a noise, only blinked, disoriented. He's not your friend right now, 𝐬𝐻𝐬 thought, smothering the guilt. He rushed him, trying to get close again, but realized his mistake too late. It was fine to get in close when going up against a much larger opponent, but with someone his own size it was usually a disadvantage. Before he could even try anything, 𝐀𝐻𝐬 flashed his smile. 𝐬𝐻𝐬 didn't have time to close his eyes. Even though his teeth were stained red, 𝐬𝐻𝐬's guard lowered like a stat game. 𝐀𝐻𝐬 used the proximity to wrap his arms around 𝐬𝐻𝐬's neck and pull him down, kneeing him in the stomach over and over again, not letting up. Each hit hurt worse than the last, but he couldn't escape the hold, as much as he was trying to tear off 𝐀𝐻𝐬's arms. As the nausea grew, 𝐬𝐻𝐬 did the only thing he could think of. He grabbed his knee when it came up, hooked his elbow inside the joint to prevent him from removing it, and used 𝐀𝐻𝐬's unsteady stance to finally sweep him. 𝐀𝐻𝐬 landed on his back with a thud. 𝐬𝐻𝐬 mounted him and rained his fists down on the sides of 𝐀𝐻𝐬's skull. 𝐀𝐻𝐬 tried to block the punches and buck him off, but he was already in pain and disoriented, so after the first 4 hits 𝐀𝐻𝐬 finally slammed his palm onto the platform. "I forfeit," he shouted, flinching, and 𝐬𝐻𝐬 paused his arm an instant before it was going to land again. The two froze there, looking at each other's sweating faces. The crowd went crazy. They were both breathing heavily, 𝐬𝐻𝐬 covered in bruises and 𝐀𝐻𝐬 smattered in blood. 𝐬𝐻𝐬 rolled off of 𝐀𝐻𝐬's stomach and sprawled out beside him on the floor, trying to slow his heartbeat and not throw up. "DMN," 𝐀𝐻𝐬 said between, "You actually got pretty good." "Thanks," 𝐬𝐻𝐬 said. "Your stance is still terrible when you're not focusing on it, though. And you telegraph too much. You don't use your quirk often enough." "That's fair." The lights above them were blocked by the shadows of 2 large figures. They each held out a hand, like angels sent from Fighting Club heaven. 𝐬𝐻𝐬 was yanked up by Brimstone, and 𝐀𝐻𝐬 was helped up by Kazuya, who proceeded to envelop him in a hug and embrace him on the cheek. 𝐀𝐻𝐬 tried to shove her away, but she only held him tighter. "Cute." Brimstone ruffled 𝐬𝐻𝐬's hair, and he looked up at the man's rough face. "Good job, Midoriya," Brimstone said, voice deep enough to travel past the loud cheering surrounding them. 𝐬𝐻𝐬 gazed around him at the audience. Adults he had fought were throwing up their fists and adults he hadn't fought were assessing him with proud eyes. Minato with his glowing hair and Takahashi with sparkling skin were whooping the loudest, having supported him from the very beginning. It may have only been a month, but Izuku felt at home here. He turned to meet Akio's eyes. Blood was still dripping from his nose, but he wasn't wiping it away. He smiled, and Izuku's heart lifted. "You better have not let me win," Izuku said, only half joking. Akio stuck his tongue out. "Never, man. I'm gonna beat you next time, though." Izuku couldn't help but laugh. Looking forward to it. Several days later, Izuku was pocketing 2,000 yen in his gym shorts. Tonight would be the first night he could place bets, and he was planning on at least tripling the amount he was bringing. "It's unfair," Akio complained on the elevator ride down to the Blue Circle basement. "With your quirk, you'll rack up money like it's nothing." "I'm not always right," Izuku defended. "Sometimes misinformation can trip me up, or there's a sudden turn of events, or something." Akio crossed his arms. "Just don't get cocky, then. By the way, what's with the mask?" The kitsune mask that Hisashi had gifted Izuku was dangling from his neck by the black strap. He lifted it up so his friend could see the red and gold design. "Oh, this was left to me by my dad before he died," he explained. It was slowly getting easier to talk about that, the pain inching away every day and only flaring up when he thought about Inko. "It's actually how I got the name of our account." "Whoa," Akio leaned forward, admiring the craftsmanship of the mask. "It's appealing. You're gonna wear it in the ring." The doors dinged open. "Eventually," Izuku said as they walked out into the crowd. "But not until you win." Akio tilted his head, his short ponytail swngng slightly. "Why's that?" Izuku shot his best friend a grin. "We're both kitsune too, aren't we?" Something dawned on Akio's reddening face, but it was quickly concealed behind his black ice expression. He nodded shortly, and walked quickly past him to ring one. When they reached where Brimstone was waiting, arms crossed, Akio looked over his shoulder and threw up a V sign. "Wish me luck, Izuku." And then Brimstone was hauling his brother-in-law into the ring to fight a woman with razor-sharp fingernails. Izuku ducked through the crowd over to the bookie with neon green hair. 1,000 for Akio-kun, he said. The bookie smirked down at him and took the money from Izuku's hand. "Have a lot of faith in your buddy." Izuku grinned back. There's no way he would let me gain a step ahead of him. He was right. 7 minutes later, Akio was throwing his fists in the air in triumph, covered head to toe in deep bleeding scratches. The Razor Nails woman was being helped out of the ring with a brand new concussion. The crowd cheered for their communal little brother, and Izuku had 3,000 yen in his pocket. Akio, standing up on the platform like it was a first-place pedestal, found Izuku in the crowd. They both stared at each other with fire in their eyes. As he watched, Izuku slipped on the mask and held up a V. Kitsune was alive, and it was time to F party.